Chairman, I can confirm it's 10 o'clock and the live stream switched on.
Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. So, good morning and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before consideration of today's business, I will outline the protocols for the meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed to the public via Microsoft Teams and is also being recorded. May I remind members and officers to introduce yourselves each time you speak and turn your video and microphone off when you have finished speaking. If the Council's live stream fails during the meeting and we cannot share the proceedings, I will adjourn the meeting so that access can be restored. If the issue cannot be resolved, I will halt the meeting and the remaining business will be concluded at a future date. If a member experiences a technical issue, I will adjourn for a short period to try to re-establish their connection. Members wishing to speak or ask a question should indicate by typing X in the chat box. As I call members to speak, I will remind you to switch on your microphone. If for some reason you cannot be heard, the Democratic and Governance Officer will advise you. Votes will be taken using a roll call procedure. The Democratic and Governance Officer will read out the recommendation and the name of the proposer and seconder and will then call each committee's member's name in turn. You should confirm your name and advise whether you vote in favour or against the recommendation or whether you wish to abstain. The Democratic and Governance Officer will then count the votes and advise the result accordingly. Where a member has declared a non-registrable interest, a disclosable pecuniary interest or an interest by virtue of any trade union membership in a matter, they must leave the virtual meeting. Their departure will be confirmed and they will be invited to rejoin the meeting at the appropriate time. I plan to have a 10-minute break around 11:45, but we'll try to avoid breaking mid-agenda item. As members are aware, on the rising of the formal committee meeting, there will be a committee briefing session on One Vision. I intend to take a comfort break before the start of the briefing session. Before we start today's business, I will ask Debbie Bolton, the Democratic and Governance Officer, to confirm members, co-opted members, participating observers and officers' attendance. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll now call the members of the committee by name. If you could confirm your name and electoral division or which organisation you are representing. Thank you. Councillor Atherfold.
David Atherfold, representing Camborne Treslothen.
Thank you. Councillor Burden.
Neil Burden, representing Stoke Clemson division.
Councillor Elliott.
Simon Elliott, representing Ludgvan division.
Councillor Gammon has advised that she'll be joining the meeting around 11 AM today. Councillor Formosa.
Hello, Mark Foremost, Yuki Treviglas.
Councillor Frank.
Good morning all, I'm Hilary Frank and I represent the good folk of Saltash South on the border with Tier 2 country.
Councillor Harvey.
Adrian Harvey, Newlyn East and Glenavon.
Councillor Kirk.
Dorothy Kirk, representing Gunny's Lake and Calstock.
Councillor Lennox Boyd has advised that she'll be joining us around midday. Councillor Massey.
Good morning, it's Gemma Massey representing Launceston Central Division.
Councillor Mustoe.
Good morning, from sunny Penshurn Valley, Councillor Mustoe, representing the delightful Mevagissey Division.
Councillor Rand.
Councillor Julian Rand, representing St Kevin and Monique. It's a bit cloudy on the Lizard, Councillor Mustoe, so you must have all the sun.
Councillor Rogerson.
Yes, it's Pat Rogerson representing Bodmin St Leonard. Thank you.
Councillor Zumby.
Good morning, Councillor Thornby representing Falmouth Truscabes. Thank you.
Councillor Thomas.
Good morning, Councillor Mike Thomas representing Helston North.
Thank you. And our two co-opted members, William Elliott. Good morning.
Good morning, Will Elliott representing the Roman Catholic Diocese.
Katie Fitzsimmons.
Good morning, Katie Fitzsimmons, Diocese of Truro.
Thank you. I can also confirm that the portfolio holder for children, wellbeing and public health is also in attendance at today's meeting. We have no participating observers attending today's meeting, Chairman, but for the live stream I will just advise which officers are on the meeting call today. Meredith Teasdale, Strategic Director for Together for Families. Ben Davis, Service Director, Children and Family Services. Kate Evan Hughes, Service Director, Education. Lisa Harvey, Service Director, Children's Health and Wellbeing. Gareth Rees, Strategic Finance Manager for Together for Families. Carol Kimberley, Head of Service, Early Years Foundation Stage. Anne Hall, Head of Service, Children's Community Health. Sharon Hindley, Head of Education, Access and Sufficiency. Frances Valentine, Senior Education Welfare Officer, Statutory and Inclusion. Charlotte Hill, Head of Partnerships, Innovation and Wellbeing. Catherine Enever, Children's Rights Officer. Angie Andrews, Head of Children's Commissioning. Tracy Clark, Democratic and Governance Officer, who's producing today's meeting, and Richard Orpwood, Democratic Support Officer, who is live streaming today's meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Debbie. So agenda item 1 is apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We have been notified that Councillors Gammon and Lennox Boyd will be joining the meeting a little later this morning, and Councillor Kirk has advised that she has to leave around midday but aims to rejoin us after.
Thank you for that. And agenda item 2, declarations of interest.
Sorry, and also Councillor Mike Thomas will be leaving after lunch for a screening appointment.
Oh, thanks, Mike. So item 2, declarations of interest. No, nothing. I can't see anything in the box. So we'll move on, thank you, to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of October 2020. Starting with page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And again, thank you to Debbie for those. A marathon piece of minute taking and writing up. Okay, that's a note. I can't see anybody who wants to raise any issues about that. I can't see any hands up. So we can look at the recommendation, please, that they are accepted. Do you take a roll call, Debbie, on this, please?
Yes, I do. I don't know whether Councillor Thomas wants to come in.
No, I was just going to propose or second.
Oh, thank you. Do I have a seconder for the proposal?
Happy to second.
Thank you. Yes, Chairman, we do a roll call.
Thank you.
For the minutes. So the recommendation is that the minutes of the meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 7th of October were recorded correctly and then they be signed by the Chairman. And this has been moved by Councillor Thomas and seconded by Councillor Rand. I'll do a member roll call, and if you could indicate whether you're in favour, against or wish to abstain. Thank you. Councillor Atherfold.
4.
Councillor Burden.
4.
Councillor Elliott.
4.
Councillor Gammon is joining us later. Councillor Formosa.
4.
Councillor Frank.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
4.
Councillor Kirk.
4.
Councillor Massey. Councillor Massey. I'll come back to Councillor Massey. Councillor Mustoe.
4.
Councillor Rand.
4.
Councillor Rogerson.
4.
Councillor Sawnby.
4.
Councillor Thomas.
4.
If we go back to Councillor Massey.
Apologies, my microphone wouldn't work. 4.
No
Thank
worries at
you.
all. Thank you, Chairman. The recommendation has been agreed unanimously.
Thank you, Debbie. So agenda item 4 is public questions.
Chairman, we've been notified of no public questions.
Thank you. And on to the next page, which brings us to post-decision scrutiny and performance, and under that heading, starting on page 11, we have the agenda item on best start in life progress report. And I believe Lisa's going to be presenting, is that correct?
Yes, good morning everyone. I'm Lisa Harvey, Service Director
Lisa.
for Children's Health and Wellbeing, and I have two of my heads of service here today. Carol Kimberley, Head of Early Years, and Anne Hall, Head of Children's Community Health, are going to present the report. But before I hand over to them, I just wanted to place Best Start in Life into some context. So we're working as a universal service, as a universal preventative service, and every year in Cornwall we have about between 5,000 and 6,000 children born. So we're looking at a population of about 30,000 under 5s that we're really trying to support to make sure that they do have the best start in life and prevent escalation and referrals into more specialist services such as specialist health services, special educational needs or children's social care. And we provide this service through our public health grant, which actually works out about £100 per year per child. So this team do a fantastic job in ensuring that we make sure that these children get the care and attention that they need. And at any one time, we have about 50% of our children who are identified and assessed as being in our universal services. And that means that these children don't require any additional support. So that leaves just under half who do. And we do through our health visiting service and through Carol's team of early years workers who have at any one time a caseload of around 500 children who they're really providing specialists intervention and support through. We also make sure that our 500 early years settings provide the highest quality childcare and early education for those children as they possibly can. So the report that we're presenting you today really gives an indication of the work that we've been progressing since we had our peer review in November 2009. As I'm sure you'll appreciate, the pandemic has impacted on some of the speed in which we've been able to implement some of the recommendations, but has also had some positive impact in that we've progressed some further. The report that you receive is focused on the work that Together for Families have done around Best Start of Life, but as I'm sure you'll appreciate, that the whole programme is really a system-wide programme. So one of our recommendations is that this is taken on as part of the One Vision board and the One Vision Best Start in Life Transformational Partnership, which we'll be having a presentation on later this afternoon. So at that point, I'll hand over to Carol, that's going to take you through the main highlights of the report, and then Anne will come in around specific parts around the health provision in children's community. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having us here today. Thank you for the introduction, Lisa, which I think has really summed things up. So I'm now looking at page 11 on my screen anyway, so we'll take you through the report and hopefully it will make sense for everyone. It has been a really nice opportunity to be able to come back and feed back on the peer challenge that took place around about this time last year. And it seems another world away almost, doesn't it, a year on, and all the things that have happened since then. But as Lisa said, it's been a good year in many ways, because ironically, the fact that we've had a lot of staff who perhaps have been able to attend more virtual meetings and have time perhaps working from home, where they've saved a lot of travel time instead of normally running all around the local authority, has actually meant that for some areas we've been able to really focus minds on picking up some of the key points from the peer challenge, and that's driven things forward as well. So it has been a year with some positives too, which I'm really pleased to be able to report to you. So if I move on to page 12 and the beginning of the executive summary, we started in Cornwall a few years ago. It was back in 2014 that we had the first early years strategy. And we've always been really appreciative in Cornwall of the fact that the council has had this very strong focus on early years, and that has really helped drive improvement in the last few years and give people that strength of work and vision in terms of helping early years education to improve. And the first few bullet points under the executive summary, where it starts that every child deserves the best possible start in life, that they have a secure, safe, happy and healthy childhood, that we have a focus on good parenting and high quality early learning, and that learning and development in the early years should be focused on high quality EYFS provision. Those bullet points all came from councillors a few years ago, where we'd had a real in-depth review of early years. And I think what's really encouraging is that those values still underpin the work we're doing, and they're still highly relevant today and inform the work that we'll be continuing to do as well. And you'll see that those had formed a vision that was part of the original strategy. And unfortunately, what happened with the original strategy was that the intention at the time was that it was going to be a multi-agency strategic response. In fact, back in 2014, it tended to be focused on what the council could deliver. And so one of the purposes for this paper, which is really encouraging, is the fact that now with One Vision being completely signed up to the Best Start in Life as that wider systems approach that Lisa's mentioned, it gives us that opportunity to really firm up and engage partnership working. And of course, that's been really strengthened in our area with Anne Hall and Public Health Nursing joining us, and all the work that's been going on in the last year within the council too. So it's a really promising base that we can drive things forward from. And just to give you that heads up of where we are in terms of the need for this, you'll see in point 1.3 on page 12 that we've really been trying to address and improve children's what's called readiness for school. And that's about readiness for learning, really by the time children get to the end of the reception class. And our first big measure for that has shown consistently that we still can't quite close the gap on the national performance for children and their overarching good level of development at the end of the reception year. And we've made huge improvements across the county in the last few years. I think when we started back in about 2013, only 49% of children were recorded as achieving a good level of development. So there's been terrific progress in the last few years, but we still want to keep closing that gap and be at least in line with national indicators and hopefully help support all our children to achieve even more. And that's what will, really drive forward our focus as we go forward. A little bit of page, the following page talks about some of the main findings that came out of the peer challenge last year. And again, I think the important thing for us was that in point 1.5, but the second point there was a quote from the report that again shows that commitment at all levels across the local authority for driving forward that improvement. And that was really recognised and valued last year, and that's been built on throughout this year as well. And I think what's also been great in the year that we've had COVID and everything else has been that we've also had a real passion and commitment from all the early years providers and the other partners who were working with young children, that even through the pandemic, they've kept that passion and that commitment as well. So we're really lucky. We've had really good engagement through things like webinars, online learning, that we've had about 300 people still training through online training this year. They've still got that drive as well. So I think, it's great that at every level there's been that passion and commitment to raise early years outcomes, and we're really grateful for that. You'll see in point 1.6 that there's also that very strong explicit emphasis has been on using early years as a driver for social mobility. And it does recognise through the peer challenge that if we can get early years right, it has that knock-on impact on the futures for children, which will help support the economy in Cornwall. Of course, again, that's highly relevant at the moment. But I think also for us in the last year, where we've really seen progress, has been that understanding that early years provision in general has been really critical to the economy, because, of course, it's made us really understand how vital it is for people for work, for key workers, and it's really helped to underpin people being able to cope in the last few months. And so it's been recognised, I think, that economic impact on people, as well as the fact, as Lisa said, we're nearly 500 settings, the overwhelming majority small and micro businesses, but employing between them all a considerable number of staff. So that if we go on through to the report a little bit more, you'll see that we've got the points that Lisa has already made at the bottom of page 1.9, that Cornwall's One Vision board have really signed up to identifying Best Start in Life as a key theme that we want to all follow. And you'll see on page 14 the One Vision structure, and I hope that that's quite clear for people. What we would say about that is that you'll see under the transformation partnerships there are 4 areas of work there, and Best Start in Life for I think for all of us is really critical right throughout all those 4 blocks. We know that the foundation years are there for a reason. We call it foundation years. It's really important for the foundations for children's lives and for their learning. But also if we get that wrong, it does have such an impact on all those other areas as well. But so much around early years and having that good start depends on having resilient families, on really supporting children's emotional health and well-being, and also the parent health and well-being as well. So all those areas are really, really critical in terms of child development. We're very aware that we need to link across to all those areas within One Vision. Part 1 of the report will then give you a little bit of a summary about the progress around the peer challenge and some of those key priorities. And then part 2 is also looking to the future and how we will want to work within that Best Start in Life framework. So I'm now moving to page 15, which begins to present you with the table. And to just clarify on the table, on the left-hand side, I've taken direct quotes from the peer challenge. So where you have the writing in bold, that was the headline information from the peer challenge. So the first one being ensure an inclusive approach to devising the new multi-agency early years strategy. It gives you a little bit more from the report underneath in the italics. And then on the other side of the document, on the right hand side, it gives you a summary of some of the key things that we've carried out in the last year to implement some of those findings. And so critically, One Vision has taken up that wider systems approach, and I think the peer challenge was a really great opportunity. It shone through that sort of lens of the peer challenge. It really engaged lots of different partners in understanding how they can contribute to early years outcomes. So that was a really fantastic opportunity for us, and it has really led to the One Vision board flourishing in terms of what they're thinking about in early years. So I'm hoping that that will explain that for you quite well. A lot of people now talking about Best Start in Life. We will talk a little bit more in depth about the Ready to Learn at 2 and Ready for School at 5 project, and that's in part 2. You have outcomes that I've already mentioned in terms of wanting to measure children's progress at the end of the foundation stage. The qualifying statement for that this year has been we haven't got 2020 data, and that's because of the pandemic and the fact that all the assessment data was paused. People couldn't carry out the assessments because of children not being in school for much of the summer term. So future planning is based on 2019 data at the moment, and we're still waiting to find out what will happen this year, but we are assuming that this summer we will have more baseline information that will be really helpful for us. If nothing else, it will be able to look at the cohort of children who've gone through the system this year, and we'll be able to see if there were impacts from the pandemic on those children's progress. Anecdotally, we do hear about an impact in terms of children's development, with some children really thriving, which has been a really good thing, but some other children have regressed in certain areas. Particularly around perhaps speech and language, some physical development, and some children sadly around things like toileting. And so of course so many children who were very young going into reception had just missed quite a lot of provision before going into reception this summer. So we will see the impact of that if we can get the data from next year. I've moved on to the next page now, and you'll see there that one of the recommendations was about actively involving parents and communities in shaping and delivering services. We do feel that we've had a lot more involvement with communities and parents. There have been surveys of user experiences, and there's a current big survey that Sharon Hindley's team has put out around the childcare provision in the sector, and the findings from that will come in later on this year or in the spring. But the Maternity Voices Partnership is probably one to raise. Anne, I don't know if you'd like to mention anything about that partnership work, but I know that your team's been very engaged in finding out more from them.
Thank you, Carrie. Yes, we're working very closely with the Maternity Voices Partnership. They engage with parents via social media and also have a group that meet up, obviously not during COVID, but they've have a really good network out wide to lots of parents, and we're able to engage with parents via their social media platforms. And this combines with midwifery as well, which is really great. And they are part of our monthly meetings with midwifery, Healthy Cornwall and Maternity Voices Partnership and Specialist Perinatal Mental Health team. So we are able to then send out messages through their groups and get feedback on what they think about our services, how we're developing our services, especially through COVID, and how are they feeling about generally being used as services during this time. So we're able to then redesign our services, and I must say we're very pleased to have them on board with us.
Thanks, Anne. In the next point, again, we've picked up on some of the issues around social mobility and how we would like to really help close that gap for children perhaps who are at most risk of disadvantage, and how we are really going to try and support them and their families. And you'll see on the right hand side there a number of bullet points. These will be feeding in through the One Vision partnership as agreed priorities, and you can see really quite a comprehensive set of points there that have been covered. I think probably I don't need to go into too much around the detail of those points, but you'll see a really big focus there, not just on children aged 3 to 5, where the children, majority of children, about 98% of children are already taking up early years provision. But we're really wanting to focus on children from birth as well. That first 1,001 days is really critical for children. We know it's backed and supported by a lot of national research. There are lots of intervention projects that we know are having an impact on children and their families. And in Cornwall, what we would really like to focus on is that early help, because that's where we may be able to prevent that escalation of need. And if we can try and identify as much support as possible at the earliest stage possible, that's where we figure that we may be able to have that real long-term impact on children, and hopefully recognise any emerging need at that earliest stage. That means children will be prepared more for school when they actually get there at the age of 4 and 5. There is a bullet point just at the bottom as well, which mentions the home learning environment, and by that what we mean is support to parents. And we've been very excited with the partnership work that's been going on with the BBC this year. You may have seen a launch from the Duchess of Cambridge had launched a project with them, which was all about a programme called Tiny Happy People. And the BBC have worked with 5 local authorities, but it's actually a national programme on their website. Fantastic use of resources there. Dozens and dozens and dozens of resources that can be used by professionals working with parents, but also by parents themselves. They're very easy. People can look at them on their phones or on computers. They're downloadable, and it's just full of useful resources, tips and videos. And so things like that, having access to high quality resources like that, will really support parents as well when they're at home or particularly feeling a bit isolated, and it makes things very accessible to help parents. Again, the next page carries on with our priority list. I think those are all fairly self-explanatory, but if anyone's got a query, please just let me know. Sorry, I haven't got the chat bar going at the moment because I'm trying to look at the report at the same time, but please interrupt if you need to. In page 18, you will see where we're talking about that system-wide approach. And the fact that what we will need to do is to record our progress and have very clear objectives, clear outcomes. Certainly in terms of education, it's about children's progress over the years and how we will recognise that as they go into school and at the end of school. Every individual setting that works with a child has a statutory duty to monitor that child's progress. And so we can look at it both from an individual child point of view, from cohorts of children within early years providers and schools, and then as a whole cohort across Cornwall. That gives us a lot of information of how we track children's progress. And do you want to just mention as well about some of the outcomes that you'll be looking for, because you've got interventions through specific programmes, haven't you, that would make would help support the monitoring of children's progress, and there are other indicators that your team can look at when they're working with families?
Thanks, Carol. Before you bring Anne in, can I just say there is a cross in the box, and Councillor Atherfold is just asking what is family functioning. Thank you. If you could do that, then we'll move to Anne. Thank you.
In this report, what we're talking about is that overall supportive, resilient family around a child, and trying to make sure that the family is supported. We're supporting the family, but also the family is in that position where they would be able to successfully support a child as well. So we're trying to really limit disadvantage and potential vulnerabilities for children through having that sort of effective family around them, that supportive family around a child, in whatever form that might take.
Okay, I mean, it just struck me to be an extremely wide term that could cover all sorts of situations, and I just felt it was a little bit too broad, really.
I think we can it's very useful to have feedback such as that, because sometimes we just use this terminology, don't we? So it's a useful reminder for us, and we can think about ways of clarifying some of these points.
Yeah, I think that'd be useful to give, just flesh it out a little bit, exactly what you mean by that. That would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Over to Anne again.
Thank you. I think I'm just commenting on that family functioning is quite broad and it's multifaceted. So if it was one specific thing, then we probably might be able to focus down more, but we recognise that trying to support a family does take a team approach, and working with the community has got a lot of wider issues in how, like we say, sometimes it takes the village to bring up the child, and there's lots of aspects to having a functioning family, and it's not easy to support everybody with that. In regard to health assessments, we obviously start very early on, working very closely with midwifery and looking at vulnerable families right from the very beginning. So we provide a universal offer to all families where they're pregnant, and visit them in late pregnancy and complete an early health assessment. And then from there, we're able to identify what type of interventions in agreement with the family, how much input they would like from the health visiting service, and what we can offer. And then we provide a new birth assessment between 11 and 14 days. And following that assessment, we're again able to review what kind of support and input that family would like, and what we're able to provide with our partners as well. We also offer a 6 to 8 week review and a targeted 3 to 4 month review, and then a 1 year and a 2 year review. Some families will get extra support and input from ourselves and from the wider team to help them support with their baby and toddler as their child grows. We use evidence-based tools. So we have a perinatal mental health pathway. So we ask all parents around their emotional health and well-being, and then we're able to follow a pathway of support if they identify positively to that. And we also use a developmental assessment called the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, which supports the development of the child and the family into how we can then have a plan of care, and then work very closely with Carol's team around going into early years settings and on that journey for ready to learn and ready for school. So quite a lot of integrated work that's really kind of, I would say, moved on quite a lot since we've moved into the council, really working very closely with early years service and early help.
Thanks, Anne. So if we move on now to page 19, if I could just pick up a little bit around the systematic approach to early identification, recommendations around that. One of the really significant areas of change that we've taken place in the last year, and Anne said we're working really closely together now, we're all one single team. And the conversations that are happening, the work that's being shared, the ability to share information more effectively has been really noticeable, and we're very, very positive about that. And I'd also just like to flag for you something around the early years service itself, which is the area that I'm leading. Originally, we had separate duties. We had an early years inclusion service, and then we had a separate early years improvement team and a separate team that supported children through child development centres. And within those teams, the early years improvement focused on children who were really at their universal level, and we looked at good practice in early years settings. The inclusion service focused on children who were what we call targeted, which was where they have emerging needs, beginnings of SEN, and beginning to have more complex needs. And the Child Development Centre team had children where they have very specialist needs, multiple needs. And so what tended to happen would be a referral would go in through the early help hub to the early years inclusion service, who may work with a child for, potentially several months. And then if a child needed additional support, there was a separate panel that they would have to take that child to, and then those children would receive specialist support. So it's quite a lengthy process and involved quite a lot of children coming through. But we've changed all that now. We are now working as a single service with one entrance point for families, where we can actually offer not only improved provision and that quality improvement for all providers, and hopefully support all people to identify needs at an earlier stage. But by having a single point of entry, we've changed the system so that as children are referred to us, we have a weekly triage meeting. And because we're all in one team, we can then immediately look at the referral, look at the information that's coming in, and make a much quicker assessment, we think, about the child's needs. So for some children, we've had the immediate ability to say, actually, these children need specialist support, and those children have picked up straight away with the right team at the right level, we hope. So we started this process in June. We now have nearly 200 children as of this week who've gone through that process, and about 60 of those children have gone straight through to the specialist team. So we feel better, it's an emerging system, it's a developing system. We're learning every week as we see the referrals coming in, but we're feeling much more confident that those children's needs are being met at a more appropriate level. So that's been quite a big change that's happened since the peer challenge, and we're really sort of mapping that and working on that closely. The next point around clarity, common understanding, again, that's helped with that process work, particularly around having more of a graded response from the early years service, and we're working with so many providers and with families and parents. But that work's captured in something called the early years graduated response document, and there's a link there on that page that takes you to the main document. That's all been refreshed this year, and what we've tried to do within it is add in additional live links to various toolkits that are online, so that early years providers who are using that document have more self-help tools, and that helps people be more confident at a universal level and improve their provision. And I'm really pleased to say that this week we had the latest Ofsted data that came through, which was up to date. They publish it every quarter, and this is the information that's up to date till August. So 98% of the settings are now currently good or outstanding, which is I'm pleased about. But within that, what we're particularly pleased about is the universal provision has improved in quality, and we've got 24% are now graded as outstanding. Nationally, that's 17%. And so I'm pleased that we're beginning to get more outstanding providers, and I'm really hoping that we can then use those, the stronger providers, to help model good practice for others across the area as well. So that feels as if even, we are moving in the right direction, we hope. That system-wide pathway, I think we still have a little bit of work on to really define it very clearly for perhaps the general public, make sure we're absolutely up to date. We've improved some of our web pages, but we still have work that we will be doing as we work more and more with other partners. That emerging whole system approach around commissioning is that area that One Vision will be able to pick up on through that multi-agency partnership working and that driving of priorities through the Best Start in Life transformation group. Lisa and Anne, I don't know if you would like to mention anything more around that particular bullet point.
Yeah, so shall I pick that up? So you'll be having a presentation on One Vision and the transformation of partnerships later this afternoon. But as Carol's mentioned, Best Start in Life was one of the very key priorities across the whole system. So that transformation partnership is being led by myself as one of the SROs, but all the transformation partnerships have joint SROs. So Jane Urban, who is the head of midwifery at the hospital, is co-chairing with me to really ensure that we've got that very much an integrated approach. And as Anne and Carol have already described, that starts pre-birth in pregnancy and lasts on all the way up until a child transfers from their reception year into year one. Yeah, and back to you now, Carol.
Thank you. Then at the bottom of page 21 and page 22, there's quite a lot of reference there to speech and language therapy. And again, they're a key partner working with us. And sadly, we do have more and more children referred in with poor speech and communication skills. So there's a huge amount of work going across the local authority with that as one of our priority areas. We had just begun to make progress in 2019, but we do anecdotally again hear that's slipping back this year, and partly probably because of the pandemic. At a universal level, every early years setting has been sent a communication toolkit. We have a lot of publicity that has been going out to early years provision, and we have ongoing training for them. But we also have some specialist programmes. So we've been funded by the Department for Education to have programmes in certain key areas. We actually have one partnership that's having additional training in the South East Cornwall area, another partnership in the sort of North Cornwall area, and one around St Austell and the Clays towards Bodmin, which they're having is it's called the Professional Development Partnership Programme. And so that's quite in-depth training where champions are being trained in early years providers who will then support colleagues across the sector in those areas with strengthening their speech, language and communication skills for children. But again, this is where we work with that BBC support, which is universal for all parents, is very handy. Lots of online resources have been available this year. And both Anne and myself and our speech and language colleagues are meeting with an external provider. We've actually got a meeting tomorrow where an organisation called ICANN, which is the speech, language and communication organisation, have offered regular sort of catch-up sessions with external colleagues so that we can have peer conversations and support, and that really helps us as we're thinking about best practice and how we can try and develop that in Cornwall. So again, I think that the early years providers we work with are very committed to this, which is great. And then finally, you'll see there the point about working with other authorities. It's just a quick summary really, but this peer challenge work that's going across the local authority areas has been really helpful to us because we can compare notes with colleagues. So I think overall, you know, with that whole peer challenge experience has been really useful and has driven things through for us. So, you know, we're really pleased with that. And the last point I won't go through because that was the basis, I know, of your report that you had last time from Ben's team. But that was just a flavour of it, just so that it's in the same table and you had all the information in one place as well. Then part two is really just to give you a little bit of summary about some work that we're wanting to do as we go forward. And I've mentioned some of this already, so we probably don't need to go into it in quite so much detail. But this really relates to our commitment to try and bring as much support in as we can from the birth to 2 stage, so that if possible we get that early support in as soon as there are emerging needs for children, and we are able to do that by our teams working very closely together and working out in communities, meeting parents on the ground, working with our colleagues across TFF, but also our wider partners such as the speech and language therapists, to support parents, to support children at that very earliest stage. And if we can then work with our most disadvantaged families and identify those that might be, for example, eligible for a place for their child from the age of 2, those children, if we can get them into high quality provision and support them in through that mechanism to take up their places, we know that that gives them a better chance by the time those children are 5. Back in 2019, those children that had a place at the age of 2 had actually made about a 10% better progress at the end of reception than those children who hadn't had that place. So, you know, that early intervention can be really supportive for them. And what we're doing at the moment is a piece of work looking at whether we can almost create a sort of best start in life practitioners that would work across the whole county really closely together. Is that sort of glue really that's bringing together the different teams around a parent and supporting those children into that provision. And so this part 2 section is reflecting that back. Some of it we've already talked through, such as the One Vision priorities. That's embedded in that, just as a reminder for all of us again about what we want to do. And your team's very involved in this. So again, I don't know if you want to just pick up on some of that work that we've been doing in the communities with health.
Yes, thank you. Really a focus on early intervention. So before we even get to that early help stage, so where we identify families where they could do with some extra help, and we've got some key triggers identified, then we're actually getting supervision from education psychology team, and we are going to be introducing some assessment tools that have been promoted by the Thriving Together team, which are doing a pilot currently, and we hope to develop across the whole county around attachment antenatally, and also observational skills early on postnatally, so that we can provide extra support to families who need that. And we know that obviously in the first 2 years of life, if we can do those early interventions, then that has great benefits later on. So we're proposing to have extra work support to do this, and we will be working very closely with our family hubs and across into the early years settings. So we're really looking forward to this extra support with some of our families.
Thanks, Sam. So I think that probably brings us near to the end of the report, unless I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Anne. I think just to sum up, really, I think you'll see the whole theme through this report and the additional information that Anne and Carol have given you, that the whole focus of Best Start to Life is really around integration. It's not only integration across all the teams and services within Together for Families, but it's integration across the whole system with maternity, primary care, the voluntary third sector, and children and families, young families themselves, who we really want to include and make sure the service that we're providing is focused on what they want through our Maternity Voices partnership and the surveys and the work we're doing for our early years settings. So yeah, I think with that we're just happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Thank you to all three of you, and it's really apposite, I think, that we're having this report this morning, because this and the next one on inclusion from Kate are such an integral part of the One Vision that we're going to learn more about this afternoon, so it's really useful to have those. It's a really good report, thank you, because the way in which it's laid out, so that it points to the peer challenge comments and the action being taken, it's also for me really exciting to see the level of integration. And you know, looking at page 26, you're very specific for why you might want to get involved in the point 214, and that's really good to see. And also the next page, on page 27, the number of sources of support and the level of integration that goes with that is just fantastic. I mean, it's been a long journey for 18 months for all of us trying to enhance integration at the council, and it's just really lovely to see that work going on and that you're able to bring it to committee today. Okay, thank you. So I've got 3 speakers already. I've got Councillor Ram, then Councillor Thomas, then Councillor Burton. So Julian first.
Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you. One thing I must say, Carol and Lisa and Jane, amazing presentation. So exciting to see the integration activities, and it's working. And Trevor and Jack and Jane will be ever so proud if they could see the results of all your hard work coming through. The only thing that worries me at the moment, and it's the same situation that we've had ever since I've been involved, and you know, I was involved with setting up preschool Gareth outlets and doing it for many years as a treasurer, so I know about the finance of these issues, and that is the funding for early years foundation remains the greatest challenge. And you know, that to me is the biggest block. I'm amazed at how much we're achieving without the proper funding. But if I turn to the Chancellor's report last week, where he's talking about funding for early years, £44 million will be provided for early years education 21-22 to increase the hourly rate paid to childcare providers for the government's 3 hours offers, and this is on top of 66 million increase confirmed in 2019. And that sounds really, really good. And then I get, again, almost the same day, I get something from the Early Years Alliance, which says that you may be aware of the recent spending review, 44 million. Unfortunately, while this may seem positive, this is likely to equate to just 5p or 6p hourly increase at a time when national living wage is not only increasing by 19p, also being extended to all employees aged 23 and over. This is the problem. It's always the case where things come in, but the early years sector, which we all say is so fundamentally important, and that's why the foundation bit is in that reference, isn't it? Early years foundation stage, because what it does, and I've seen it myself, I've felt it myself, that young children that come into that early education, whether they come in at 2 or 3, they gain so much. They are so school ready, and it makes such a difference to their learning. So what, if anything, can we do to improve funding for our early years settings is my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rand.
Okay, Carol, I don't know if you want to come in there, but I would say that, you know, we're already working towards supporting all our settings. As Carol said, all of our early year settings are very small businesses, and through the grant funding, additional funding, and then that quality support that Carol's team give them to keep them up and running, keep them high quality, keep them afloat. You know, we could do more with a larger team and more kind of early years consultants that can support through those settings. But Carol, I don't know if you want to come in there and add about some of the support that you're giving.
I think it's you know, it is such a difficult situation, and it's probably compounded by the fact that many of our providers may not necessarily be experienced business people. Because very often they've come into it because they enjoy working with children, they have a vocation to work with children, but sometimes, of course, that doesn't necessarily match the fact that the way the system is set up at the moment through headcount funding, through having to operate as a business and really be in a competitive market isn't the skill set sometimes, and so we do have quite a lot of support to try and help people really understand the mechanics of it. We have put quite a lot of training on in the past to try and support people with that. So I think we always have two things. One is that whatever funding we do get in, we have tried to support them. We have tried to give additional grant funding. We put a lot of additional funding into the system this year to help them through COVID, but also we've tried to strengthen that training and how people think about their work. A few years ago, we had a slightly different system because the local authority had a duty to manage the market. And so if a new provider, for example, was to set up and there were already existing providers in place, we had the ability to say yes or no to that. Unfortunately, we don't have any of that now. It's just complete open competition. And so we do need people to be quite realistic if they're setting up new businesses about where they're placing them. You know, have they really thought about the market before they set things up? But really, these are new skills for us because, again, most of us come from an education background and less of a business background. But I think anything we can do to flag up the business support available across the county to early years providers would be helpful. And
thank you. Meredith, do you want to come in? Is it on this point, Meredith?
Yes, it is. So, Councillor Rand, you're raising, I mean, I think what you've already heard is that with the money that we have and with the work that we're doing within early years, that in Cornwall we're doing a really good
fantastic job.
I think the issue that you're talking about is that lobbying of government around the right funding for early years and early years provision. That's something which the County Council network is looking at and has raised concerns, and we have been in discussion with the DFE about the need to really look at the right funding within the early years sector and the potential vulnerability that's been caused particularly by COVID, both for providers and also for the flow of children and young children going into early years and childcare provision as well. So I was part of that discussion with the County Council network probably about a fortnight ago, and we'll keep scrutiny up to date with what is happening. But certainly the conversations with the DFE were positive. The issue obviously is with the Treasury also recognising the issues that the DFE are hearing loud and clear from us.
Can I just say, Meredith, Lisa, Carol, etc. You know, that there was absolutely no criticism about our service, what we're doing in Cornwall. We are doing an amazing job. Given the levels of deprivation we have and the challenges that we have. It's not about that. It's how we can use any opportunity to lobby government. And believe me, this has been going on for such a long time. I can remember a House of Lords report that went into this that said it's totally underfunding and we should be doing, and nothing happens. Year after year after year goes by. I can remember those reports coming out in 2012, I believe, and here we are 2020, and really there's been no fundamental investment in our young people, and it's a nonsense, and it really gets me cross. But no criticism whatsoever for our people, because I think we're doing an amazing job. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, everyone in the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. OK, over to Councillor Thomas. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Carol, Lisa and Anne. I fully echo what Councillor Rand has said, and I would go back in time beyond 2012. I can record in my PGCE training days in 78 that very clearly the academic evidence of the importance of those 1,000 days was very clear to us as secondary school new teachers. That was self-evident, and it's over the last 42 years there have been improvements, but they've been caught up with political issues as well. And I'd certainly agree with Meredith and Julian about the importance of lobbying, and it is a political issue. It simply is a political issue. My questions, I've got two simple, basic questions and an observation. There's a minor typo on the bottom of page 12, which I'm sure you spotted. There's an as missing on 1.3. Oh, and also at this point, in terms of presentation of the report, superb, but please, as in all these cases, I mentioned this in health meetings as well, could we have a glossary for the public as much as for councillors, so that we can actually have an explanation of the acronyms, so that we can go to those pages to start off with, rather than having to work out further in the document what SEND is. And just for example, and SALT, because that would be helpful if at the beginning of the report you could actually have those acronyms explained. Otherwise, there's too many what I call TMAs, too many acronyms. Anyway, the point that the 2 points that I'd like to, or questions I'd like to make, is about referrals and interventions. As the chair has identified, there is a whole list, a very broad list of reasons for intervention. Is it possible for somebody to self-refer if they really do feel they have got issues and they're not perhaps getting the support they think they should get? Can they self-refer? And is it possible through antenatal classes to actually establish, or is it established, that this connectivity with provision for early years is like a 5-year contract before they start in a primary school for the young people? Is that something that does take place, that young mothers are made aware that this is a 5-year deal, if you like, where support is available should they feel they need it? And my last question is really one of tracking, because obviously this is Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, but we live in a very mobile society, and many young families move all around the country. And it may well be possible for children to disappear unless there is some system in place that they are tracked and followed to their next destination. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. So the first point around self-referral, I mean, absolutely, all families, all parents are positively supported to self-refer. So we have what we call a client advice line that's open Monday to Friday. I think it's 9 till 6, is it, Carol?
9 till 5.
9 till 5, where we have specialists, health visitors, support workers there to answer queries. We actively encourage engagement through our social media platforms, and all families are, although they're assessed during their new birth assessment and placed in a pathway, totally recognise that that can change following further assessments or following self-referral. Your second point was around early years education. Early years education isn't compulsory, but we use the whole system to encourage our families to take up that offer, particularly, as Carol has said, those families who are identified for eligible for funding at the age of 2. And with that really close working with the wider system, GPs, professionals within the hospital recognise that, are taking that on board, and we've got the whole system of professionals talking to families, and if you've got a rising 2, having that conversation around are they going to an early years provision, and recognising and the understanding the importance of that. And your third point was around tracking and mobility. So Anne may be able to come in there around how if a family, because the wonderful thing about our Children's Community Health Service, it's a universal service. So we know all of those 30,000 under 5s. We're looking at them, we're tracking them, and if they move out of area, we have a way of, if there are a family with additional needs, we have a way of alerting the authority that they move to, and we do that mainly through GP registration, because we know that families will leave one GP register, they'll register with another GP practice, and then through that the health visiting records can be requested and passed on. I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add there, Anne, around following families.
Yeah, certainly we've got a national child health system, so that as children move into the county or out, it's based on GP registration. Then we're notified of that, and then we'll do transfer in and transfer out visits, and that is tracked across the whole of the country. So we're linked in with the acute hospitals when new babies are born, so we have immediate notification of that, so we're able then to follow up from the midwife, and all that is now brought into the council, which is a big added bonus. All our families are recorded onto the Mosaic system, so therefore that makes a wider information database really of all the families in Cornwall, which perhaps, you know, when we weren't in the council, that wasn't available. And that is certainly, since the last 18 months, is really useful, certainly for all our multi-agency colleagues that are on Mosaic as well.
That's good.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for raising that, Mike.
Thank
you. There's a bit more on page 19 about the referrals, Mike, that you might want to have a look at too. So thank you for that. We're over time, but obviously this is a vitally important issue, so I'm not apologising for that. But if you could keep your questions precise and the answers precise, that would help. Thank you. Councillor Burden.
Yeah, it's brief, and it may be better to do it this afternoon, actually.
Okay. You're going to hold it for this afternoon then, yes?
Yeah, okay, if it's further kind of detail and information around One Vision, then we'll cover all of that this afternoon. We'll have plenty of opportunity for questions.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, members? You're on mute, Neil.
A lot of families have not the privilege of the extended family as they did have, and grannies have not been able to help out, and I think that is quite a serious situation. Thank you.
Thank you. As a granny, I can assure you I'm still doing it. Okay, I just wanted to...
We're living in Devon.
I just want to mention one thing. We obviously, our minds as councillors, because of the free school meals issue, have been very much focused on child poverty, and I noticed on page 23 that that you've put in place money matters advisors, which seems to me a really forward step. I mean, there's not a lot out there for these poor families, but at least if we can ensure that what they are entitled to they're getting. So that seems really positive. And I just wondered, is there much take up of that from families?
That information, I'm afraid.
Don't think we've got the data, Pat, to actually back that up. We could obviously look into that.
Okay, Angie's just come in. I don't know if she wants to say something. Thank you, Angie.
Yes, hello. The Money Matters has started well and they're working out of the family hubs. Take up is slow at the moment, but we're increasing that as best we can.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you. Maybe we need a bit of a push on that to publicise it. But of course, for the very seriously deprived families, they don't always have the emotional space to even want to seek it out, let alone get in touch with an advisor. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. But thanks for that, Angie. At least that's a little bit of hope. Thank you. Any other questions? Or should we move on? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the presenters. It's a really good report and really encouraging. And it's lovely to hear your warmth about about the decision to bring you into the council. It's really lovely to know that that's working both for you on a personnel level as well as a practical level for our young people and families. Thank you. So the next issue is also one that is inherent in the work that we're going to hear about this afternoon. So it's really good that we get a bit of an in-depth look about this this morning to help focus our minds. So that's on inclusion in our schools, and I'm going to hand out.
Chairman, could I just interrupt? Can we go to the vote on the
It would be useful to do that, would it not? Thank you, Debbie. I'm so keen to stick to the times. Thank you. Right, on page 11. If you'd be good enough to read that, Debbie, for the purposes of the live stream, please. So the recommendations are, and there are 3.
Chairman, so there's 3 recommendations. Thank you. There's 3 recommendations. The first one, that the committee note and is reassured of the progress made towards meeting the recommendations from the peer review undertaken in November 2019. That the committee agree that a separate council early years strategy is no longer required, and that the One Vision Transformation Partnership Best Start in Life plan becomes the main system-wide planning and strategic tool for early years. And the third recommendation, that the committee notes the developments of the Ready to Learn at 2 and Ready for School at 5 programme, which forms the Together for Families part of the One Vision Best Start in Life. If I could ask for, thank you, Councillor Elliott's proposed.
Thank you, Simon. And a seconder, please.
Very happy to second.
Thank you, Julian. So we'll go to the vote then, Debbie, please. Thank you. And thank you for your reminder.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, this will be via roll call, so if members could indicate for, against or abstain. Thank you. Councillor Atherfold.
For.
Councillor Burden.
Is your mic on, please?
Councillor Burden. I'll come back to Councillor Burden. Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Gammon, I think has joined us meeting yet. Councillor Formosa.
For.
Councillor Frank.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Kirk.
For.
Councillor Lennox Boyd has joined the meeting.
Yes, I joined at 10. Thank you, Debbie. Yes,
Good morning.
For. Thank you. Good morning to you all.
Councillor Massey.
For.
Councillor Mustoe.
For.
Councillor Rand.
For.
Councillor Rogerson.
For.
Councillor Stormby.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
And our 2 co-optees, Will Elliott.
For.
Katie Fitzsimmons.
For.
Thank you. Can I go back to Councillor Burden? Are you?
Debbie, I don't think Councillor Burden's on the call at the moment.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Chairman. That vote has been agreed unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. So now we'll move on. Okay, so over to Kate and Francis and Sharon. Thank you.
Good morning and thank you, Chair. I'm going to set the context and then Francis will take over with the meat of the matter. As everybody will appreciate, a sense of belonging is critical to ensuring our children and young people thrive and that we enhance their life chances. The Together for Families is developing a belonging framework which has got 3 strands. One is school inclusion, one is cultural inclusion and one is social inclusion, and this is definitely supporting the One Vision transformation agenda, as this does need to be a system-wide approach if we are going to enhance the sense of belonging for our children and young people in Cornwall and beyond. Francis is going to share with you the initial work that's been developed as part of the school inclusion element. Over to you, Francis.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Kate. Yes, and good morning to everybody. I'm Frances Valentine. I'm one of the Senior Education Welfare Officers working in Cornwall Council. I'm here really just to talk about obviously the report that's been submitted, and as this is we're still in the very early stages of the initiative, then to really just talk around what we're hoping to achieve with this piece of work and how it's come about. So it's really just to give you a bit of a synopsis really of the report, of the paper, and as Kate has just said, it's part of the belonging framework, and it is the school inclusion strand of that, which also sort of fits very nicely with the other strands of it, and also along with following on from Carol's presentation just now about the best start. I think this work will continue, hopefully, the work that's already being done there. So what we're aiming to do is to develop a proactive multi-agency approach to support schools, children, young people and their families across Cornwall, and developing a team around the school approach and also sort of a team around the pupil really, to identify key people who can support the child to access the best education that they can and maintain their school place, reducing the numbers of moves for whatever reason, either by exclusion or a managed move or a move into home education. What we're trying to do is stabilise school placements and keep children in their place so they can access their education. Across the country, nationally, we've seen exclusions rising over the last few years, both at primary and secondary level, so it's obviously a national concern, leading to more pupils having to access alternative provision, or as I've just said, move into home education. There's national evidence that education, social and employment outcomes are obviously very negatively impacted by school exclusion, or they can be, at a higher cost to individuals themselves, families, the services and society. But here in Cornwall, I have to say we have seen a much more, the data is looking more positive this year than it was last year. So I think we're beginning to see a bit of a change in sort of thinking around exclusions and how perhaps schools and services can be more proactive. So we're developing, like I say, an early response model with multi-agency behaviour management to recognise and understand specific family circumstances, with particular attention to adverse childhood experiences, unmet or unidentified learning needs, all of which may impact pupils' ability to manage within their school setting and the structures and the boundaries around that setting. So the approach will link in and will complement existing initiatives, of which there are some very good examples out there in Cornwall. We've got the Bloom, which is the Children's Mental Health Services and Primary Mental Health. We have the Pupil Placement Partnership, which Sharon chairs weekly, which is about looking at moves out of school into alternative provision and reintegrating back into schools following successful work within WAVE. Working with the Troubled Families programme and particularly around trauma-informed approaches and helping schools to really access that approach and ways of working with children. And like I say, through the conversations that we're already developing with schools and already having, we are beginning to see a bit of a change and a bit of a shift in sort of approaches, because we know that schools do want to hang on to their pupils. They do want to give them the best opportunities that they can, but that's obviously not without its challenges. There's plenty of research out there that tells us that the outcomes and life opportunities can be significantly reduced for excluded pupils, as I've said, with the high cost of services, which could be increased contact
with health services, with social care, police and the criminal justice system. Employment opportunities can be limited then if a child has been excluded. This can obviously have an impact, perhaps leading to poverty, debt, and possibly homelessness. And that's obviously links then with the social exclusion aspect of the belonging work. Because if we can give children a better start, then hopefully they will feel more able to participate within their communities when they leave school. So by linking in with colleagues and services aiming to support schools and families with this process, we would be accepting requests from schools when they're beginning to be concerned about a young person and who might be on the brink of exclusion or very much at risk of exclusion. And we would be considering a very cohesive approach with working with the services and with schools and the family to try to identify and acknowledge the challenges that pupil might be facing, really, and to be able to support the schools to engage with the pupil and to understand what's happening for them, and to provide really a sort of support network that enables them to maintain their school place, as I've said before, with the minimal amount of disruption or school moves. So we can, we've got a lot of services, really enthusiastic and really interested in working with us on this. We're using our colleagues in early help, who can offer individual work to families, or they can offer youth workers. They can do drop-ins to schools, or they can do individual work, say, outside of the schools. Our health services, our health school nursing colleagues are on board with this, and they can do health assessments for the child. Our youth offending colleagues are on board with this, and they can offer preventative services, working with children who are on the brink of criminal activity. And we've got the voluntary sector Young People Cornwall also working with us, and again they do a victim support service as well, where they can work either with victims of crime, sort of young people who are victims of perhaps assault within school settings, or even the people who have committed those offences. They can do some work with them. So we've got a lot of interest and lots of support. We obviously use our WAVE partnership for our alternative provision at the moment, which is mainly around the way we currently use it is to commission places within the WAVE settings. But what we're hoping to do is also to use WAVE to perhaps bring some of the good work that they do out of their setting and into school settings, so that we're using them in other ways other than the commissioning of places, and I think that could be really successful. And we're working with Head Start Kernow around, particularly about the trauma-informed approach, and they will be offering, or they can offer advice and guidance to whole school settings around that trauma-informed approach, so that although a lot of schools are trauma-informed trained and have individual staff who deliver that approach, to have a whole school approach would be really effective, because then you've got a consistent response across all school staff. And that would be about sort of developing relational and more restorative approaches to behaviour challenges. So we identified a pilot area, as noted in the report, which is the sort of Redruth, Cambourne, Helmston and Penzance area, and those were identified really because those were schools who were already showing interest in using sort of different sort of approaches to managing the particular challenges that they've got within their areas. And we're obviously very aware of each sort of demographic has different challenges. Each area can be quite different in itself, has its own identity, and so we need to work individually with those schools and families around those particular areas. So really that's sort of summing up the work that we're trying to do. I hope that's sort of summed it up really. I think what I would like to say is that when you hit, what we really want to do is bring in the child and the family voice as well, and have a lot more sort of collaboration within that, you know, sort of process of if a child is at risk of exclusion, to really bring in the parent and the child to be part of that process and to help to sort of really consider what's been going wrong. And I think, you know, through my work, I've heard young people sort of putting really heartfelt statements to head teachers and to school staff about acknowledging their own behaviour, the challenges that has created, the difficulties that has presented to schools, and asking for a level of understanding. And I think if we don't give that level of understanding and consideration and perhaps empathy, then we're doing a disservice, really. But that doesn't take away at all from recognising the huge challenges that schools face in trying to maintain their boundaries, their expectations, and ultimately keep both their pupils and their staff safe within schools. So it's finding a way forward with that. And maybe that's something about trying to reshape some of the language that we use around sort of, you know, why are you behaving like this, to what's going on for you, and have a more kind of understanding approach to trying to draw out the young person's experience and understand a little bit more about what's actually happening for them. So that's the aim, really, to create the framework of support around the pupils and the families and the schools, like I say, to access and engage in their education in the most positive way possible. If we've got, you know, there are lots of reports that have backed up these sorts of approaches across the country. You know, it's reflected in the Timpson Review, in the exclusions guidance, in reports from the Children's Commissioner. The short-term benefits, as referenced in the report, would be reduction in the number of exclusions, improved school attendance and attainment, improved emotional well-being for young people, improved engagement within that education setting, reducing spending on the high needs funding block, and also a reduction in transport costs, where we have to set up individual transport, particularly around alternative provision. The longer term benefits are about improved educational outcomes, which then lead to the financial savings on public services, which I referred to earlier. And also about improved community and participate, as young people feel that they can participate and contribute to their local community by you know, employment opportunities, etc., and the reduction in antisocial behaviour, or any, you know, the risks that young people who are excluded face, particularly around exploitation, drug use, and again, that sort of being on the periphery of criminal activity. So bringing all of that together, this initiative is hoping to really, you know, address a lot of those issues and to give our young people in Cornwall a much more positive educational experience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kate and Francis. Thank you. What's not to like? And how lovely to get a report that starts off with the word belonging and a presentation that includes the word empathy. It's stunning, and it's stunning work. And again, at the risk of being boring, how lovely on page 48 to see the number of services on board with this, because teachers can't do it alone and the council can't do it alone. So it's fantastic to see how many have come on board and are willing to help with this. So I've got a lot of interest from the committee as well. I've got firstly Councillor Atherfold, then Councillor Rand, then Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Thomas. Okay, over to you, David. Thank you.
Right, good morning. Having worked in most of the Wave Trust academies, firstly, have they got the resources to be going into secondary schools mainstream and supporting them and identifying issues there? And secondly, have all schools been involved in this opportunity to partake in this?
So if I take that one in the first instance, so the I guess for Wave, it's about reprofiling the resources. So Rob Gasson, who's the CEO, and I have had a number of conversations. if we can reduce the demand in terms of the alternative provision places, then there's definitely the resource, and at the moment we are definitely seeing that already having some impact. So that's where we free up that resources. So we see Wave as a strategic partner with us in this, rather than as being so it's a change in the culture of how we use Wave, and certainly Rob Gaston is very enthusiastic about that and is supportive that he has the resource to help that. And he's passionate about maintaining children in their mainstream school, despite the fact he's an alternative provision provider, and his staff are as well. In terms of have all schools have been consulted on the approaches. It's always a tricky one when you start something like this, because it's one of those things that everybody wants to be part of. So that's why we are rolling it out, because we need to make sure that we don't overpromise and underdeliver, because that would be catastrophic. So if we do it steadily, but the aim is that by the end of this academic year, we will have got it into a place where every school is able to participate in this programme.
So just to clarify, up to this point, not all schools have been included?
All schools have been included in the discussions and have been enthusiastic about participating, but we are piloting it to see what the level of demand and what the resource implications are.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, David. Councillor Rand.
Yes, good morning. I'll get there in a minute. Oh dear. Right, okay. Yes, just to follow on from that, and another extremely good presentation, a warming presentation. I've got two very small questions, really. Obviously, making integration happen, that whole concept was much about having people available to spot situations in our young people, and I'm talking about dyslexia, autism, and those sorts of situations, which can affect a child. The child doesn't know why it acts or feels the way it does. The parents similarly, and I'm talking from real experience here, as some people will already know, with my son who wasn't diagnosed, or we didn't understand had dyslexia when he was in year 6, and it was only by the good work of Sue Leatley at the Senko that we discovered that he had dyslexia, and that was one of the reasons why he wasn't performing, and the teacher was getting grumpy and he was getting upset and wanting to go. And I've seen in other settings and other situations that parents who don't understand or don't respond take the view, oh gosh, I can't put up with this, I'm going to do home education. And that's a motivation for a lot of people to withdraw their children from school, which I don't think we want to see if we can avoid it. So the question is, I suppose, are we using that early intervention, and do we have sufficient Senko support within the system? Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the support for Senkos, if I take that part first, so we have Senko surgeries that are run by our SEND service, and we have Senko support provided by our education psychology service, and a lot of that is about that early identification of needs so that we can intervene sooner rather than later and support the school and the family. I think the key bit for the piece of work that we're doing now is about that voice of the young person and the voice of the family. I think often families that are facing exclusion, particularly permanent exclusion, feel that they're not heard, that nobody understands what's going on. So it's the presenting behaviour that's being addressed rather than what might be sitting behind it. And the whole purpose of this is to get in before we get to that stage, so that conversation can be held. And if there are family circumstances that are really tricky, it's not for the school necessarily to support that, but what we have now got is those wider agencies that are really keen to be involved, like our family hubs, who might be able to support in that part of it, and therefore give the child a breathing space, or the young person a breathing space, so that they can actually feel that their needs are being addressed.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I note there was the Centre for Social Justice report on AP looking at sort of successes and so on back in May, and I think it's quite heartening that in Cornwall, I think it was on, I'm just trying to see which page it is, 61 of the overall PDF, where it talks about secondary absence and inclusions, and it comments that the rate of exclusions amongst students with special educational needs was 3 times higher than none, and nationally that's 6 times higher. So I think obviously it shows that we're already doing something right in Cornwall, and indeed the rate of students on free school meals being excluded is, whilst distressingly still much higher than those who are not, again is better than the national picture. So I think shouting about what we are doing right is a really important thing. But the thing that is I find most alarming is the fact that sorry, I'm just trying to find the data. In primary schools in 2017-18, 100% of permanent exclusions were boys, and in 2018-19 that was still 77%. Do we know if this situation is improving? Because obviously in primary, for 100% of permanent exclusions in 1 year to be boys is really quite alarming. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Councillor Elliott, I think the previous presentation is absolutely where these two things link up, and it is about that early identification and the early support that we can provide through Carol's team right at those early years stages, making sure we haven't missed anything. I think there's also something about when we have those conversations now at the early stages, so before we're facing those permanent exclusions, that actually we look at, you know, is the learning environment right for that young person? Does it need tweaking in some way? Is there something that could be done differently to suit how that young person, and is it just that that young person's maturation is not there yet, and that the expectations are need to be sort of recalibrated to make sure? What I can tell you is that our permanent exclusions this year are already down quite significantly. And if you just give me 2 seconds so I can find the data. So in primary, we've had 1 permanent exclusion this term to date. It was 8 this time last year. And in secondary, we've had 10 to date, and it was 26 in the same point last year. So I think even the fact that we're having the conversations and that schools have certainly made a real sea change in terms of their response to what young families may have experienced through COVID, you know, together we are all making that difference.
Oh, just if I could come back, do we know why in 1 year we had 100% of the exclusions being boys? Have we identified why boys in Cornwall? Is that, looking at the national picture, I'm not sure it was quite the same. Do we know why it is was so massive for boys in Cornwall compared to girls?
No, we don't, but I can find that out and make sure that we have that information supplied to the scrutiny panel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon, and thanks for that, Kate. And before I move to Councillor Thomas, who's next, it's interesting that referring back to the previous presentation, when we were looking at the vast plane of different interventions they might do, one of them was actually mentioning school effectiveness. And I think that very often, it may just be me, I don't know, but very often when people talk about school effectiveness, they tend to think of exams and of secondary children and GCSE and A levels. So the fact that the early years team are actually looking at harnessing the expertise of the school effectiveness staff can only be good. So again, a fantastic link between both the presentations that we're having today. Thank you. Do you want to come in at this point, Lisa, or is it something new?
Yeah, I think just it's on this point really, and it's kind of following on you'll have heard around our health visiting teams that are doing developmental assessments at the age of 1 and 2, and we've identified in those developmental assessments we have a much higher percentage of boys that are below the threshold in that assessment that Anne talked about, the ages and stages questionnaires, and we're looking into that. So we're doing an audit actually to look at why that might be right at that very early stage at 1 and 2. So we'll be able to come back with some of the feedbacks from that audit once it's completed.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. OK, over to Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Francis, Lisa and Kate for your presentations. And I think it's really amazing and positive what has been done by Cornwall Council, seeing as Cornwall Council is no longer responsible in the same way or doesn't deliver the education because of the academy structure. And thank you for what you're doing. I feel as a former teacher that and really many years ago now, so Councillor Elliott has got much closer experience than me, probably yesterday. I feel that there's a much bigger picture that we need to be aware of, and in a sense, COVID has accelerated the whole issue. I mean, I personally are of the view that their schools need to have adequate counselling, and there needs to be a pastoral care system. We also have to think of the issue of class size, whether this is contributing to some of the tensions that might exist. And I'm focusing on secondary here. I have no experience of primary schools other than sending my own children to them. The curriculum the curriculum structure and the subject offers that schools are making, which I think is what Kate sort of hinted at when she was speaking a few moments ago, and also the issue of the testing regimes that schools may have, and I'm sure the effectiveness. The tension is obviously between having good academic qualifications from the school and also having fully well-rounded and happy young people. The thing that's not been mentioned, of course, is that certainly I feel since I left school in 2014 as a teacher, the availability for young people of illegal drugs, in my opinion, has increased. And I know that Safer Cornwall and Devon Cornwall Police are really working hard to sort this out, but it really comes back down to what Councillor Rand mentioned in a previous item, the issue of funding, and we really need all our officers who work in Safer Cornwall and in the police service to have, I think, more funding access so that they can be of help in that area. So I'm sorry, I haven't really got a question, just an observation, but I just wonder whether anything I've mentioned there does have some connectivity with this, and thank you again for what you all are doing.
Thanks, Mike. Does anyone want to pick that up, officers?
Yeah, just in terms of the curriculum, we've got some embryonic work that's being undertaken with Cornwall College around looking at alternative curriculum, and I think that's, and as always, I think it probably comes back to Councillor Atherfold's point. The demand is probably outstripping the supply at the moment, but it is that bit about making sure we get a really quality offer and making sure we don't rush too quickly.
Yeah, thank you. I agree.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that as well, really, that in terms of the the part of the work that we will be offering into schools is around sort of from the educational psychologist team and the Head Start team around supporting teachers and school staff with some reflective space, really, and some opportunities to kind of look at their own, sort of their own I don't know what the word would be, really, but that we're just recognising, really, that teachers and school staff are under an awful lot of pressure, and that when you've got a young person who is presenting with, over and over again, perhaps with very challenging behaviour, that it's also has an impact on the teaching staff as well, and on school staff in being able to manage that. So it's about creating some opportunities for them to have that reflective space as well. And certainly in terms of, I absolutely understand about the, the substance abuse, and I think it has, the opportunities for young people to access illegal substances has increased hugely, and we will obviously work very closely with our social care colleagues and early help colleagues around trying to address some of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's good that the report does mention and focus on the needs of staff and in school, and yet we know too that there will be young people in school who are sometimes in classes with staff who can manage their behaviour and the way that their needs are manifesting themselves, or the lack of stuff that they've received, whereas other teachers' style doesn't. And I'm hoping, I guess, that and I speak from experience of speaking to somebody recently, and I can say it because I know we're live, because it wasn't a Bodmin school, it was elsewhere in Cornwall, that I would like to be encouraging head teachers to utilise the skills of the staff they have got, who are able to manage behaviour very well, and to see what are the techniques and the skills they have to do that, because they're there. they do exist in the schools. But thank you also for noting the difficulties and the pressures that the teachers are working under as well. And I know you do, and I know how helpful your team was, Kate, during the COVID lockdown. Thank you. So thank you, Jackie. Welcome. And next there was Councillor Atherfeld.
On page 56, we've got a scatter graph with rates of exclusion. Well, what's really interesting about that is at the top there, 6 schools recorded no permanent exclusions in 2018-19. Do we know which schools they are, and are what they're doing, is that being seen as best practice for other schools to say, look, this is what they're doing and they're succeeding, let's copy them, let's, you know, look at what they're doing and take it forward?
So yes, we do know who they are, and yes, we do share best practice. I think the only bit I would be cautious about is the context of schools can be very different, and therefore one size doesn't necessarily fit all. So you can't lift the practice in one school and necessarily drop it onto another school. You've got different staff, as the chair has mentioned, different staff have different skill sets. So yes, we do. That's part of the support that we're actually getting as well from WAVE, because they will also know, and the voice of the young person is absolutely critical in this. And one of the pieces of work that WAVE are doing is asking the young people who are with them what would have made a difference for them, and some of that will pick up some of the, you know, this teacher did this and it was really good, but actually 2 other teachers did that and therefore it didn't work for me, and that's why I landed up where I am now. So, you know, that sense of taking the best practice, this works, but you can't, you know, I'm a firm believer you can't just pick it up and drop it onto a school, because as you will all appreciate, school cultures are very different across different schools, and therefore they're not all in the same starting place.
Would it be useful to share that information, who those schools are?
I've no problem sharing it in terms of giving you the factual information in an email as to which schools they are. The only bit is that I would want it taken with the context of those schools may be in very different places from the other schools. What I wouldn't want to see evolving is a league table around exclusions, because the cohorts that schools take are very different, and I'd be nervous about a league table that says this school's better than that school because they've had no permanent exclusions.
If it helps, I'm no fan of league tables in the first place, so that wouldn't have. But yeah, an email would be useful.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments anybody wants to make, please, or questions? No, I can't see any more crosses. So before I go to the comfort break, I might actually remember to take a vote on this issue. Okay, so back to the recommendation, which is on page 43. The Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee is asked to note the contents of the report and to endorse the activity that continues to support the Council and Schools' commitment to inclusive practice to reduce school exclusions across Cornwall. Could I have a proposal, please?
Very happy to propose.
Thank you. That's Councillor Rand, and a seconder?
Seconder.
Second.
I think that was Councillor Thomas, yes?
Yes.
Thank you. And over to you then, Debbie, for the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendation has been moved by Councillor Rand and seconded by Councillor Thomas, as read by the Chairman. If we could go to our roll call, again, it's for, against or abstain. Thank you, members. Councillor Atherfeld.
For.
Councillor Burden.
He's not on the call, Debbie.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Gammon.
For.
Councillor Formosa.
For.
Councillor Frank.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Kirk.
For.
Councillor Lennox Boyd.
For.
Councillor Massey.
For.
Councillor Mustoe.
For.
Councillor Rand.
For.
Councillor Rogerson.
For.
Councillor Sawnby.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
And our 2 co-opted members, Will Elliott.
For.
And Katie Fitzsimmons.
For.
Thank you, Chairman. That recommendation is approved unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you to our speakers and thank you to all contributors. Thank you. Right, so we are going into a comfort break slightly early. So we've all done extremely well. So the next item is at 12, and that will be listening to children and young people, including, we hope, the showing of the short film. So provided all the technical stuff works, we look forward to that. So back at 12, please remember to put off your mics and turn your cameras off. Thank you. Is there anything else I need to say, Debbie?
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Chairman.
Lovely. OK, so back at 12. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.
And so welcome back, members and officers, and all our visitors as well. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the report from Lisa again, and Charlotte Hill and Catherine and Angie Andrews, all of whom are present. I don't know who's going to present, ladies.
Yeah, so I'll just do the context setting and then
okay,
hand
thank you.
To Charlotte. So so far this morning you've heard about Best Start in Life and inclusion, and as with these projects and any project at work we do across Together for Families or across the system under the umbrella of One Vision, the golden thread really is ensuring that we're committed to hearing the voice of children, and that we focus on children's rights throughout all that work that we do. I think, as Kate said earlier, as a kind of routine part of that work, and right at the very beginning, when we're strategically planning, designing, commissioning or delivering services, we make sure meet the express needs of children and young people, and that we support them to influence our decisions and use them as the experts by experience that they are. And we also use their voice to kind of continually receive feedback and continually quality improve our services, because we know, and you'll hear from the presentation and from the video that you're going to watch, that children really want to have their voice heard. And I think just kind of with the note to the Best Start in Life presentation you had at the beginning of the meeting, you know, it really does include those pre-verbal children or children who are non-verbal, making sure that we consider what they would want to say to us if they were able to. And with that, I'll hand over to Charlotte to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you. I'm just going to load the presentation. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah,
yes, we can.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So thank you, Lisa. Catherine Enever and I are going to be talking to you today about listening to children and young people, but specifically about children's rights and taking a children's rights approach. As Lisa's just outlined, this is something that we do routinely in children's services, but children's rights approach extends that further, and something that we need to reflect on. But this is also about extending the approach right across the system and right into the community as well. So this committee has heard previously from us in terms of the work that we've been doing, and we've brought a number of examples of that. Usually we are accompanied by young people, but obviously we're in different times at the moment. But as Lisa said, you will be hopefully seeing something from them at the end of this presentation. So previously, this committee has endorsed the Youth Engagement Guidance, and that has moved forward quite significantly, not just in terms of organisationally, but beyond as well. And it certainly sits under the umbrella of One Vision, and we are working with the Isles of Scilly as well, so that we look at the practical methods, if you like, that support us in our work with children and young people, and certainly helping them to express their experiences as we understand the needs around them and how we plan and commission services moving forward. I think that has been very positive, and we've got established mechanisms set up for that. But what you're going to hear from Kath shortly is that is only one part of a children's rights approach. So why should we be listening to children and young people? Well, as you've already heard this morning and have also posed questions around the issues that young people and services are facing at the moment, we have unprecedented levels of change across a whole range of issues. Yes, there are the budgetary constraints, and we're feeling those, you know, globally, never mind within our own organisation and those of our partners. But alongside that, there are going to be changes in the workforce. There are going to be changes in the wider economy. So those financial changes, those financial pressures are going to increase hardship in families. And we already know, certainly for Cornwall, with our economic status being, I think, in the top 2 most deprived areas in Northern Europe, and that is also illustrated by the amount of European funding that we receive, that we already face those challenges, and as members have picked up earlier, funding of our public services, particularly around supporting children and their development and their education, continues to be very challenged as well. So those financial pressures are going to cross-cut everything as well. We know pre-pandemic that climate emergency, that has not gone away. It dwarfs the pandemic in many respects. And you've heard previously from young people about their thoughts on that as well. And it's something that we are continuing to develop with young people in terms of, what we can learn and what we need to do in order to give them hope about their future. Obviously, the impact of the pandemic cuts across everything. We are seeing rising challenges, rising concerns in terms of mental health and well-being of young people, but also of adults. And so the references that Francis made earlier to the importance of a trauma-informed approach is no more important than now. And the work that we're doing through Head Start and also through other services around trauma-informed approaches is going to continue to be very, very important. And that goes beyond services, it extends into the community as well. We know as well, there was also reference to increasing access to drugs, for example. We are seeing rises in risks around exploitation. That is something, very real in Cornwall at the moment. We've talked about poverty, and also some of the things that may not be so evident, but has come up again this morning around speech, language and communication, and how important that is. And if you think about the mask wearing that we're doing at the moment, if you think about, new mums, there's a whole range of factors that are going to further compound some of those challenges that we're seeing in our early years children as well. And I think it's also important to stress why we need to be listening to children and young people, because all of our interests are around the healthy growth and development of children and young people, so that they are healthier, have healthier adulthoods, they have opportunity in adulthood, and that those aspirations exist that enable all of us to look to a more positive future that is prosperous in terms of health and well-being and the environment that we exist in. And first and foremost, it is about how we shift to a culture that is embracing of children and young people and is all about their futures. So I'm going to hand over to Kath now, who's going to explain more to you about what a children's rights approach is.
Thank you, Charlotte, and hello to everyone today. This next part of the presentation, as Charlotte said, is really to try and make the connection between listening to children and young people and a rights-based approach. Something I've been learning about a lot in the last 18 months of being in the position of Children's Rights Officer. It's been very exciting so far, and I think I've started to recognise that the level of connections between all of the things, in fact, that we've talked about this morning so far, and how they fit with children's rights and a rights-based approach. So the framework and the overarching area that we're looking at today is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, something that within the UK we are signed up to, and the convention, as I have here, is the most complete statement of children's rights ever produced, and it's also the most widely ratified international human rights treaty in history. I think there's just over 180 countries and states now signed up to it, and that's quite incredible in terms of a combined effort to focus on children's rights and promoting and upholding them as young people and children who are important. Thank you, Charlotte. So just to give some context and history, I'm very aware that some of you here will be very familiar with the UN Convention. Others of you, this may be more information that you've not known before. But we've just passed, just in November, we've just passed the 31st anniversary of the UN Convention. There are 54 articles in total within the convention, and they cover all aspects of a child's life and set out the civil, political, economic and social and cultural rights that they have. Out of those 54 articles, 42 of them are actually the rights that children have and equal to all children, and the remaining articles are to focus on how governments, adults, and in the roles that we have, how we have a duty to promote and uphold those rights for children and realise them. 42 articles can be quite a thing to get your head around, and there's a great summary of the articles, which I often refer to in terms of just becoming familiar with the different areas, and I'll just post that up in the chat box if you want to refer to it while I'm talking. But what is really helpful is to have 4 guiding or general principles that combine all of the articles together, and those are the areas that I'd like us to think about today. In moving through this discussion, thinking about the voice of children within that. So the first principle is around non-discrimination. All children have the access to these rights. They can't be taken away from you, although I think when we think about COVID and things like that, I think some of us can be quite challenged on that at the moment in terms of entitlements and rights. Article 3, which is also a principle, is looking at the best interests of the child. How are we working in a way in everything that we do to make sure that the best interests of the child are a top priority in all decisions and actions? So considering all the policies we have, we're looking at One Vision today. How can we show and evidence that the best interests of children are being shown within that? Survival and development. It's actually life, survival and development. So going back to Carol, Anne and Lisa speaking first thing this morning about early years and the importance of that early years development and support we give to families and children. How are we showing that, and how are we giving due regard to that within everything that we are doing? The final guiding principle, and one that we're more familiar with and we're talking about today a lot, is respect for the views of the child. So how are we making sure that children and young people have the right to express their views, feelings and wishes in all matters affecting them, and to have those views considered and taken seriously? And this right applies at all times, particularly when there's decisions being made in the interest of that child. I raised just now, but one thing I learned quite early on in this role, that children are rights holders, but the role that we have is duty bearers of this convention. And I really want, what I've started to learn is how can we do that in Cornwall? How can we promote and uphold these rights for children? Thank you, Charlotte. So I always come back on my previous role is social work, and so therefore I always come back to so what? Why does this matter? What does this mean? And I think it takes me right back when I first started the role. I read a book by Sir Al Ainsley Green, who was the first Children's Commissioner. And in the opening sections of his book, he talked about actually why have we got rights for children, and it wasn't actually until the beginning of the 19th century that we started to really consider rights for children. There were no formal mechanisms to protect children, the environments that they lived in, unequal access to education and health, almost to the point where there was quite a low cultural view of children, and survival rate was very low. So bringing rights into an arena to support children and put things into place, I think gives an indication of where we are now, and some of what we've heard again this morning is very, very much about upholding and promoting children's rights. In terms of children needing separate rights, I'm going to refer to CRAE, the Children's Rights Alliance England, and they looked into this as part of a mental health briefing, and they raised that children are separate and unique to adults. They need special protection because of their vulnerability and developing maturity. They have special developmental needs and evolving capacities. They sometimes are less articulate than adults, and they are less likely to be taken seriously and to have less power. So in terms of promoting this and having it as an explicit area to focus on, that is what they are saying. So is it a duty or a value? I've talked about the fact that we have a duty, but I think listening again to people this morning and people's reaction to what we're looking at, I think very much within Cornwall we have a very strong value around children's rights and promoting and upholding their best interests, their development and their voice. But also in terms of looking at the deeper impact and meaning, there's been some really interesting elements of research around what it means to have children's rights as a focus, to use it as a framework, and what does that mean for children. And in terms of giving children a voice, again, there is information and research to show that children having a voice encourages and supports them to develop the skills in communication, expressing themselves, things like negotiation. So again, looking back to the speech and language and communication areas that were being looked at by Carol this morning, being able to support children to develop those things, to be able to express themselves and make themselves heard in a way that we're able to do so. Involving children in decision making also improves their sense of confidence, esteem and well-being, as well as thinking and problem solving skills. Also, learning about rights themselves helps them develop understanding and empathy and respect for others. Also, local and global understanding and knowledge and sense of purpose. An example of that, I have spent some time with a school in the West, a junior school, who is a rights respecting school, one of the UNICEF programs that is run, and having a whole school approach to children's rights has really offered them a process within their curriculum environment. Whatever topic they study, they look at children's rights within that and have a process of leaving a legacy. So whatever they learn about, they make the connections often with that community, with that situation, and then look at how they could make a difference, what they can do as children and young people growing up into adulthood to support inequality, discrimination and things like that. There's also reports from rights respecting schools. This is just one area of children's rights that is focused on. A report from Hampshire some time ago around rights respecting schools and how children have been able within schools that support that kind of whole approach, similar to a trauma-informed, with a whole approach to children's rights, and the voice at the heart of that is showing increased levels of self-regulation, confidence, effort and motivation. And also teachers gave feedback on children's increased use of critical thinking, persuasive argument and decision making. So offering that in either school environments, community environments, how can we build that out and make that a norm that we think about in all aspects of what we do. And I don't want to take away from the fact that a lot of this is already happening within Cornwall. There's some very positive elements. The final point there is how do we connect rights, well-being and needs? We talk about well-being and needs an awful lot at the moment within everything we do. And so I looked into actually what does that mean? Where do rights fit within this? And what I think is becoming clearer to me is that when you think of rights as an entitlement for children as the most basic level, if we are not promoting and upholding rights, if we are not meeting children's rights, it generally means that their needs and well-being is not being met either. So how do we frame that together? Thank you. One other connection, now I haven't actually found so far any research to connect this, but it came into my mind in terms of how we connect research and understanding of systems and children's rights and children's voice and their development and best interests. And it brought me to Bronfenbrenner's systems theory and systems model. So I just thought I'd pop this into the presentation as food for thought, really, with the child at the centre of their world, and then the influences that are around them, and considering children's rights in terms of the different organisations that we work with within the local authority, the decisions that we make, the planning, the organisation, the strategies, how all of those things, how and where do we consider children as the centre of that, which we are doing, but as terms of children's rights, how do we do that and recognise and make sure that we are giving due regard to children's rights and all the influences that can have.
And also, Kath, just to say, obviously the Bronfen-Brennan model was conceptualised quite some time ago, and when we looked at this with young people for the Head Start programme, they have added the digital world around the young person, and that's something that I think we do need to give very high regard to at the moment, in terms of how do children's rights sit in this digital world as well, and what can we learn from them, because quite often it's an area that we do need to, but it also extends into the application, in terms of education and skills, future job prospects, and also in terms of safeguarding and well-being. So it's another dimension that we're exploring as well in this context.
Thank you, Charlotte. So in terms of where we stand today, the convention at the moment still stands within international law within the UK. However, Wales and Scotland have very much embraced the Convention on the Rights of the Child and have taken significant steps towards enshrining rights within domestic law. So in Wales there is the Rights of the Children and Young Persons Measure 2011, and they are very clear that in all policy and decision making, children's rights are given due regard in all of those areas, and they have a great document. I think it's been attached to the information that you've had, The Right Way, which also contains guidance to how to work towards that and make sure that in all areas we are supporting children's rights, and they are at the heart of everything that is happening, but also that it's explicit and we're really clear about that. In England, we are slightly behind Wales and Scotland, and therefore I suppose from my role and my position, I would be liking to say, okay, where does Cornwall want to be? How can we have aspirations to kind of keep up and pick up to where other areas of the country, of the UK are? An interesting read that I had some time ago is the Kids' Rights Index annual report, which looks annually at the state of children's rights. There's various areas that are considered in terms of judging and assessing different countries who are signed up to the convention in their areas of health, education, development, and how they are doing and seem to be doing in terms of children's rights and promoting and upholding that. The UK does fairly well in areas of health and education. Certainly listening to the work that's being done this morning, we can evidence how we are promoting, particularly in early years, in terms of inclusion and belonging in education. So there's areas that we do well in. However, the area that we fall down in, and actually for statistics, we are ranked 170th out of 181 countries, is around how we enable an environment for children's rights. And at this point, we sit low, and it is not because potentially children have a worse situation than children in certain other countries, particularly those that where their rights can be very challenged, but actually that within the UK, the view is that we are not investing in children's rights in line with the resources that we have available. So picking up in terms of Councillor Rand mentioned this earlier, in terms of investment, that is showing through significantly in terms of how we are doing. And what the outcome of that is also indicating is that we are continuing to have significant differences in outcomes and life experiences for children in the UK. Thank you. So therefore, what do we want to do about this? How do we move forward? And I found this an interesting quote, that the rights are only as good as the way an individual, country or society or professional responds to them. So how do we actually implement, how do we want to look at realising children's rights within Cornwall? There are some really helpful examples that are going on within the UK at the moment. I've already mentioned the rights approach within Wales, the Children's Commissioner within Scotland. Even the resources that you can find on their website is really interesting in terms of making sure that information for children and young people and their voice and the resources are accessible, they are fun, they're engaging. How can we do that? What can we do in terms of bringing that within Cornwall? Also, another one of the UNICEF's programs, Child Friendly Cities, gives us just some food for thought in terms of how do we want Cornwall to be, and how can we be explicit about it. Interestingly, Leeds started within the UNICEF programme, but then went ahead themselves to kind of promote a child-friendly city, which I think is quite a statement to have. And then how does that look and what does that mean? So there are areas that we can tap into to find out more if this is an approach we want to look at. So practice in Cornwall, I think we're already hearing this morning the good practice that is going on in Cornwall. How are we doing in terms of children's rights? I think there is significant, from what I've learned in my role over the last few months, there's recognition and significant interest in children's rights. The voice of the child is central to an awful lot of our work in terms of embedded practice in certain areas for certain children who are experiencing certain things for them, such as children in care. Certainly the work that's been done around well-being and mental health. We are really considering children's rights. There are lots of examples in terms of how we are using the Convention to support assessment strategies, policy and direct practice. One of those has already been talked again about this morning. France is talking about inclusion and the pupil placement process. It's been a real pleasure to work with Francis and the team in terms of looking at really bringing the voice of the child into the processes there, but also not just looking at the voice of the child, but how, as part of that, we are then within our process also looking at best interests and consideration of the development of children within that. So listening to children alone does not necessarily, I think, lead to influence and impact. So whilst we might reach out for children and young people and hear them, what are we then doing in terms of making sure we are using rights as a framework to make sure the process that we have and the strategies that we have also address that too? So Article 12, the voice of the child is, I think, very much at the heart of a lot of our practice, but also in terms of what does that mean? And I've talked about some of the impact of young people and their voice and how it helps them in their development, but also in terms of the work that we do, why does it matter to the local authority and to partners? And again, CREA will bring up with them, they talk about how young people have an important contribution because they see things differently to the way adults do. Again, it helps them develop the skills, knowledge and confidence, but also it gives a very clear culture of valuing children for who they are and recognising that they have their own autonomy. Would anyone like to ask a question at this point?
Catherine, I have a number of crosses in the box. I don't know whether you want to take those now.
If it's relevant to the point, I'm very happy to at this point, yes, of course.
Okay, I've got Councillor Frank, Councillor Rand, Councillor Elliott, and somebody, and oh, Simon is saying he'll wait until the end. Thank you, Simon. So we'll go with Hilary first then, thank you.
Sorry, actually, I'm there under false pretenses because it wasn't a question. I'm sorry, Catherine. It was just, I wanted to say thank you for an amazingly thoughtful, thought-provoking presentation. I'm loving listening to you speak. Thank you. That's all.
Oh,
sorry, it wasn't a question at all.
I'll keep going. That's nice.
We like those as much as we like questions. Thank you. Compliments are just as good. Thank you, Hilary. Julian.
I'm sorry. I'm so thrilled with this meetings overview and scrutiny committee, listening to these presentations. Phenomenal, Charlotte, Catherine, fantastic work. I suppose this question is really aimed at you, Pat, strangely enough, as chair. And the question is this: could this committee look at what Scotland and Wales are doing, and as much as possible replicate it, at least those measures, in Cornwall? Why do we have to wait for England, which is always behind in these? Why shouldn't we maintain the highest of standards for our wonderful children in Cornwall? That's my question.
I think you're absolutely right. We certainly are, in terms of our integration programme, and are ahead of the game. I guess the answer is yes. But practically, I guess, in terms of the research needed to be brought to us, at this stage in our work plan, it won't be simple. We've already added a lot of work to officers' workload as a result of some of the work on child poverty that was passed at full council. But certainly, what a lovely legacy. I mean, Debbie will be looking at the legacy of this administration and what we're leaving for the administration coming ahead of us, which may or may not contain some similar members. So what a lovely thing to be able to say that this is what we would like to see, because of the work we've done in the past 4 years, to be on the agenda for the next committee, and whatever format it takes.
Oh, fantastic.
Let's do that. So I know that Debbie will be wanting to work, I don't know whether, certainly with Simon and me, to look at what we're going to do towards the end, but I'm hoping that when we set the agenda for the final meeting, we'll be able to include all committee members in it. So thank you for that. Yes, the answer is why not? I don't know what the officers.
Thank you. And we've got such amazing officers with Charlotte and Catherine. I mean, you know, they're stars. Thank you.
So yes, so can I come to the officers? Is that do you want to pick up on what Julian has said in terms of how much input this committee could, or you would like, or we would like to have?
From my perspective, I'm very open to as much as possible, and in return as well. I've had a really exciting 18 months, and I think that's been reflected in the interest that has already been developing in terms of just reaching out beyond also Together for Families Directorate and Safeguarding Children's Partnership, which I'm working in and very supported by. But for example, you know, being contacted and connecting in with Safer Cornwall, being linked in with policies around, for example, I had contact this week in regard to debt management. How can we look at our debt management policies to consider the impact on children around family debt, or how can we look at housing strategies to reduce eviction in terms of impact on children? So the approaches are there. I think what I'm finding is to look at how we can do it consistently and to have it explicit within what we are doing. But if I continue, and this might help as I just kind of move through the rest of the presentation and any more questions towards the end. So there are quite a lot of examples around policy practice and the work we're doing with partners, including police, within education, health visitors, school nurses. That's been very, very positive to date. And I think, Charlotte, I think you're going to, the next slide is looking at some of the other work that has been quite key to moving this forward as well.
Yes, thanks, Kath. So I'm not going to talk through all of these, but this slide just gives you an indication of some of the work that's been going on during the pandemic period. And there are links there that you'll be able to follow up to look at things in more detail, including there's another film there in terms of Cornwall We Want, and I've got another one to add as well, which is a really lovely example of primary age children being involved in their thoughts of the future of Cornwall, and so I'll add that link on as well. But as a young person in the link that's on there, describing what she would like the future of Cornwall to look like, very eloquently in terms of what the climate impact could be and could mean for Cornwall. We've got the Head Start Kerno Are You OK survey, which we did the first one in the first lockdown, and had some great responses to that, which I think I've brought to committee before. We're just analysing the second one, and as I'm sure you will appreciate, it will indicate some changes in terms of what young people are experiencing in terms of their well-being. And what isn't on this list is of course some national surveys, so the Children's Society, Young Minds, they've all been contacting and talking to young people, Couth as well, and we know that there are already impacts being felt by young people as a result of the pandemic in a range of aspects of their lives. I've also referenced there the Together for Families commissioning page, and Angie's team work very hard at whenever we're looking at going out for services, how young people are informing and influencing that, including, very importantly, their experiences. And we've got mechanisms to talk to specific groups of young people where there may be particular vulnerabilities. I've also highlighted Healthwatch as an area for development. So we've had some recent conversations about how can the role of Healthwatch help understand, reach more young people, so that we're getting a much more comprehensive understanding of their experiences of health and care in particular. And also, as you know, our partners in health very routinely ask children and young people about their experiences of services, and we have particular relationships with our voluntary sector, so Young People Cornwall and Intercom Trust, who we work with very regularly to seek the experiences and the voice of young people. But as Kath said earlier, there is more we can do on that, and we could maybe be, through One Vision, have a more beneficial approach in terms of linking things up and having a clear and coherent strategy for not just what we're going to be asking young people, but why, and are we going to be listening to them about all aspects of their lives, and how do we then ensure that those voices, those experiences are reaching other services, as Kath just illustrated in terms of, debt and housing. So really, really important, but really important that we emphasise the the importance of how we join this up now. So learning, and as you've heard from Kath this morning and previous presenters, we're learning all the time about what's working. We're learning about what's making a difference, and we're also learning where excuse me, I'm losing my voice. We're also learning where things are still not working for young people and their families. So
Charlotte, I'll jump in if you need me to.
Yeah, might be a good idea, Kath, thank you.
Is that okay? Yeah, so I think we're looking at how and where and in what way can we consider children's rights as an overarching framework for how we work with all children and young people. I think we have particular areas and particular young people that we are focusing on, but I think it's all children, and certainly in terms of the impact of COVID, a lot more children are being impacted on in lots of different ways, but it's also about being very explicit. I think within most of the documents, most of the information we hear about the way we are working with children and young people, certainly within children's services, we know and understand what we're doing, but actually how do children and families, one of the areas of the children's rights is actually to make sure children and young people and their families know about their rights, and that we are being explicit about what we are doing and how, in the same way that Wales are doing. Picking up on really needing systemic change, to it becoming a normal in all areas of the work that we do, within the council, but also with partners, to give due regard. So not just having elements of activity or an event or a project and that almost reactiveness. And I don't think at any point is anyone's fault for that. I think we're very much often caught up in the day to day, and all that sounds like a good plan. How do we do that? But actually coming away from the more reactive areas of talking and engaging and involving young people, and focusing on a rights approach which involves that as normal activity and due regard. I think you've spoken a little bit about the youth engagement guidance there, Charlotte, but would you like to pick up on that point?
Yes, it was really just to reflect back to committee, huge thanks for the support for that youth engagement guidance. And I know Councillor Hawken has also been a real strong advocate and has kind of pushed that agenda into cabinet and the leadership group as well. So it's really gained momentum, and has and what we're finding is as more services are it's generating interest, and also the conditions around us are changing. That needs to become more dynamic. But as Kath has described, that youth engagement guidance is really setting out some principles and some guidance around how we can involve young people, and we really need to take it to the next level now, and really think about how children's rights become embedded in everything we do, which is not just about that voice element. And the children's rights approach does give us a mechanism to universally recognise, acknowledge and involve children and young people, and that is something that I know members have also expressed some interest and concern about, in terms of we have a number of mechanisms for engaging with some of our more vulnerable young people, but we do need to consider all children and young people in Cornwall. And we know, there's that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, is Cornwall that village? And how do we ensure that it's not just about services and organisations, but it's about all of us as individuals promoting and advocating for children and young people, and really creating this culture of nurture that we want to see our children and young people thrive in. So as we're now coming to the end of the presentation, and as we like to do, we like to involve young people. So we are going to do that through a film, which I hope the technology is going to serve us well with. And Tracy, you're going to load that film, aren't you? So I will unshare my screen. There will be an opportunity to ask questions after the film. It's a few minutes long, but I hope it will engage you, and it's essentially an opportunity to promote the Make Your Mark. So there is currently a consultation happening at the moment around priorities through the Youth Parliament, and they're going to talk to you a bit more about that now. And this is where we hope the technology works. It's showing promising signs. Tracy, I think we might have lost it.
Sorry, Charlotte, I'm retrying.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks.
It's worth the wait. .
Chairman, would you like to take some questions while it's being loaded?
Okay, we'll do that. I've got Simon, who was waiting till the end, followed by Mike. So Simon first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the things we would all agree that we have to have a strong listening to the youth voice. But when you look at the Cornwall Council website, which is no criticism of Together for Families team, when you look at the Cornwall Council website, it's about as unfriendly to anyone other than geeks like myself as it could possibly be. And when I searched on Youth Council, Youth Parliament, I could find 2 Twitter accounts for Youth Parliament East and Central. The website, the Facebook page is being taken down, and there is nothing on the Cornwall Council website at all. So I've just been sort of having a fish around, and Together for Families, you have to dig into health and social care, not education where you would expect it. And I think at the moment, Together for Families team is being let down by the organisation of Cornwall Council's website. And if we're going to engage with young people, the tech team behind Cornwall Council have got to support Together for Families in creating something that is as engaging as all of the stuff that you show us in the presentations. But you go on the website and you either can't find it, or it's drier than a desert. So it's anything that you need from us to argue for a centre that is fit for purpose for what you're all trying to do. You know, I think you only have to ask, because at the moment I think it's really letting down that thing that you're trying to do.
Yes, I agree, and there are some technicalities, technical protocols around council websites, but it is certainly something that we have started some discussions on, and one of the reasons why when we received the lottery funding for Head Start, we created a very different look and feel and accessibility for the work of the Head Start Kerno programme and the Start Now website. So it is certainly something that we do understand and hear loud and clear.
I think there's also recently, to respond to that as well, I think certainly recognition to that, and there is a section within the council website that is around helping hands, and I'm currently working with those that oversee that to start to look at actually how we can integrate children and young people's needs and rights within in that as well, in terms of being able to start linking up what is there, but also the user friendly and accessibility of that too.
Thanks, Catherine. With your permission, Mike and Hilary, I'm just going to bring in Meredith, who's asking to, I think, refer to this particular question as well. So thanks, Meredith.
Yeah, so just to give assurances that part of the transformation work, which I'm sure you've been hearing about, which is being led centrally and for across the pieces, certainly looking at how we're communicating with all of our people and all of our residents, and that will absolutely be looking at how we better communicate with our young people, but there are some successes, and I think if you do have access to social media and following the Twitter account of Together for Families, you will see that in those areas, and actually in that area of social media that young people are probably more acquainted to than going on websites, there is some really good work and good messaging taking place.
Thank you for that. Shall I take Mike's and Hilary's, or is the film ready yet or not?
I'll try again.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lily, Member of Youth Parliament for East Cornwall.
I'm Josiah Barron. I'm the Deputy Member of Youth Parliament in East Cornwall.
Youth Parliament is a way that people can get in touch with decision makers like MPs through young people. Make Your Mark is a scheme that we use. It's used nationally. in the UK, where young people vote for what they think is most important. And we come out with the outcome of a national top 2 and a local top 2. The national was climate change and knife crime, and local was climate change and mental health.
Climate change can be hard to listen to, and things about climate change can be hard to listen to because it's unknown and it's scary, and it means changing a lot of things about our lives. But talking about it is the best way forward and is the way to improve, and actually talking to each other across age gaps and across knowledge is the best way forward. And it's not about always just having to meet in person and talking about it, talking online. So the group, there's a lot of people in Cornwall from all across Cornwall who talk to each other, and we discuss ideas, we discuss knowledge and news. And actually that creates a more of a community as well, where we can talk about other things. I originally was part of the team who set up the group that strikes in Truro, and then we had other people who are really interested and really passionate about the climate change issue and the climate emergency. And so we decided to set up a group so that we could discuss our worries and our fears, and also to plan what next, what's the next step in making that change.
One of the most important parts of being eco-friendly is raising awareness to others. We do this by assemblies to show people what they're doing to the planet and how that's going to damage it. We also hold strikes within the school and outside in like Penzance and places like that. We also have a project week completely dedicated to it.
So last year we ran a detox festival, and its aim was to educate people about the effects of plastic on the environment.
The Detox Festival hosted a range of performances.
We had lots and lots of stalls that came to the festival to educate the public about ways that they could live their life in a way that was kinder to the planet and kinder to themselves. So we had like bamboo toothbrushes on sale, beeswax sandwich wraps, kind of simple things and simple steps to living a more sustainable lifestyle. And that's what the festival was about, just showing everyone ways that they could be kinder to the planet.
We went to the environmental conference in October, and we think it was a really good learning point. We quite liked all the active stuff, and we were quite a part of it, so I quite like that bit. Joel, did you like?
Yeah, it was amazing to see so many different schools with a variety of different ideas, some of which we could use in our own school.
It was pretty overwhelming how actually so many schools had actually turned up, when it was just, we just thought there would just be like 5 or 6, but it was about 20, I'm quite sure, yeah, loads.
Our school went to the Schools Environment Conference in October as well, so 5 of us went, and it was like our sort of first big eco event that we'd all been to, so it was really nice to go meet and connect with all the other schools that were there and sort of make connections outside of Penrith, which is where we're sort of usually talking to people. The main thing we sort of took away from the conference was the kind of scale and variation of action people are taking, and we're beginning to build networks across the county and all over Cornwall. Before, it felt like we weren't making a difference, we were just one small school and a few people within that school who were trying to make a change. But after going to the conference and seeing so many people there like us who were trying to do small steps at a time, it was really inspiring, and we now realise that through doing small things across the county we can make a massive difference. Because they did a presentation for us at the front of the auditorium, so it's really cool to listen to what they have to say, because obviously like the kind of conditions and things they have back where they're from is quite different, so it's really nice to talk to them and see how they're approaching things in like a completely different environment. And it was great to talk to them and see, you know, how they're spreading the word in their school and everything.
It's not about being young people and old people, or young people and adults. It's about having that cross between them, and having the younger people teach the adults and the adults teach the younger people about what we know. And I think that we all need to listen to each other and share our opinions and our voices and what facts we have. And it's important to have those debates and to not kind of put our backs up. when it comes to the climate emergency, because like there's no enemy, there isn't an enemy in this. We are all together in it, and I think that that conversation needs to be between everyone, and that we can't be putting our backs up and telling people they're wrong, because that is what's caused such a huge global issue.
Thank you, Tracy. That's brilliant. So that film just is one example, and you've seen some previously as well. And I think, you know, young people are very articulate and very clear about, you know, they want to be involved and engage. You know, that intergenerational relationship is really important, and very important for the community as well. And we know young people have had such an influence in relation to the Siwenna unit, for example. So they were instrumental in informing those design principles as much as the type of and the experience of service that they wanted as well. So, you know, the potential is there, as I know this committee understands, but it's about how we can now reach out, not just in terms of organisations, businesses, but, you know, the whole community of Cornwall. So that is the end of our presentation, but very happy to answer any other questions.
Well, just to add there, Charlotte, as well. Sorry, Pat, I interrupted, but just to say, I think it's not just doing more of the same. It's not just reactively going out. It is a step change at this point, and it's a fantastic opportunity if we can take it.
Yes, thank you to both of you for your presentations, and it's lovely, Catherine, to hear your enthusiasm as it's developed, and you've talked about your own learning within this, and that's really lovely to hear. And I was quite surprised to see 2 of my grandchildren in the film, so that was rather nice, unexpected and rather nice. So thank you so much for that. I've got a question, but I'll save mine until the end, so I'm going to go to Councillor Thomas and then Councillor Frank. And then who's KS? Somebody help me.
Katie Fitzsimmons.
Sorry?
Katie
Lovely. Thanks, Joe. Thank you. I need the names. Thank you. OK, so Councillor Thomas first.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Catherine, and thank you to Charlotte for a fascinating presentation, and the film really sort of was the icing on the cake. Thank you so much. Really, really support what you're doing. I think it's absolutely brilliant. As a former teacher, as many of us on this committee, I'm afraid are, you know, we can certainly identify with what you're doing in a very, very big way. I would like to see it also about responding. So it's listening and responding. I think that's the important point. I took a link to Cardiff. Cardiff is my home city, and I was quite keen to see what they're doing. I've supplied the link to their child-friendly city document, which I think looks very good. And if this is the seed that creates the Cornwall-friendly document, then let be this moment in time. That's when we started that off. I would like to see the next committee take that aspiration forward, and I think Pat agrees with me. I think there has to be a practical way in which we can be seen to be doing things in terms of Cornwall Council. Again, it's very difficult because we don't have those schools. It's all done through the academy chains, but it is possible, as we could see through that film, to consider Cornwall Council responding through conferences, which in themselves will create more ideas and spill outs. I always felt that the member of the Youth Parliament has got great potential, and I would like to see some connectivity to between Cornwall councillors and the member of the Youth Parliament, so that there is a consultee relationship created, so that we as councillors are familiar with who is a Youth Parliament member in our area, and it's part of our role to actually liaise with them. I think that should be a definite way forward. And like 3 other councillors, Councillor Barnes, Ian Thomas and Councillor Ellenbrook, I am a member, or a director rather, of Cornwall Youth Cafes. And I'm really of the feeling that for vulnerable young people in Cornwall, every single town should have a youth cafe. Now, as a teacher, I know that not all young people want to go to youth cafes or to youth clubs. I realise that, but there are certainly a significant minority that can be greatly helped through having youth bases in every town. And my last point is, also as a teacher and then becoming involved with youth work very much in the background, I don't have a hands-on experience, I'm very conscious that there is a real disconnect between the teaching profession and youth workers. And I think it would be a real achievement if this council, or any council for that matter, could actually bridge that gap, because there is a sort of different perception of the work that goes on in each area. And I really think that connectivity would be very, very, very beneficial to young people.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. That was a statement. I don't know if either of the officers want to come back. Do you want to come back, Catherine or Charlotte?
Yes, I can certainly come back in relation to some developments around the Youth Parliament, and Angie may also want to contribute around that. But in terms of strengthening the connection, the leader of the council, Councillor Hawkin, have actually made some progress with that, and invited some young people, which included Youth Parliament, to a session in the summer to hear from them their experiences around the pandemic. But also there has been something similar to the leadership board, I think it was the end of last summer, and the leadership board are very keen to align priorities with the Youth Parliament priorities. So I think once we get the outcome of this Make Your Mark session now, that there'll be an opportunity to revisit that, because obviously at this point we don't know whether the priorities are going to stay the same. So there's definitely been some progress on that. I think in terms of youth services and youth provision, obviously they have been affected quite significantly. Again, Angie may have more to say on this, but we certainly, working with our existing youth organisations in Cornwall and building connections between them and schools, is something that is actively happening at the moment. And certainly from a Head Start Kernow perspective, we are looking at how we enhance that as well. So I think absolutely those connections are things that we could still do more work on to enhance them. And that means then that the reach and the equity across Cornwall is also improved in terms of access for young people.
Thank you for that. I've also got Angie and Catherine who want to respond to Mike. Can I ask you to be as precise as you can, please, because we're running over. So Angie first.
Yes, thank you. I'll be really quick. Youth Parliament have been involved in the Cornwall We Want, as you know, which is fantastic. But we are developing it much, much further, and we will have much closer links with members. And I'll be really pleased to be working with you on that.
Thank you.
That's great news. Thank you, Angie. And Catherine?
Thank you again, very briefly. Mike, you talked about the response, just not the... Just put into the chat box a link to Laura Lundy, or Professor Laura Lundy's model around being heard, and the kind of key areas there are audience and influence. So actually, what is that cycle of voice? And just for interest as well, Professor Lundy is going to hopefully be our key speaker at the Safeguarding Children's Partnership Conference in January, which is focused on children's rights as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So over to Councillor Frank.
I think I'm there. Yeah. I just want to pick up firstly on Councillor Elliott's point about the website. Councillor Thomas and I are involved in something called the Digital Advocates, Members Digital Advocates Group, which Tracy is also an officer working hard on that. And we are looking at completely revamping the website, and I can assure you we will make sure that it looks much more snazzy and engaging. So just to reassure you a little bit on that. but also I think the portfolio holder is on the call, but I would suggest that subject to what the chair of this committee and the vice chair discuss with the kind of legacy we might be leaving to the chair, to the next administration, perhaps the portfolio holder might want to talk with the chairman of Cornwall Council, because I think the chairman of Cornwall Council will be very keen to promote this kind of project going forward.
That's really, really good news. Thank you. And can I just ask, Will, in terms of you working, you and Mike working as advocates and revamping that, will there be any young people involved in that revamp, or on a guidance or an advice basis?
That's a really good question. Does Tracy know any more about that?
Chairman, if you'd like me to comment, just to say
yes,
that.
Please.
Just to say that I know that the web team who were looking at this, they ran a number of sessions in conjunction with Falmouth University facilitating them, and I believe that there were sessions with young people as well, but I will double check that and I'll report back to the committee.
Great, that would be lovely, thank you, because I'm aware that, and it's been such a lovely and positive morning, but I am aware that in coming to this committee, you're speaking to the converted, and unfortunately there are other councillors who are perhaps less keen that young people should have a voice. So I wondered how, before I come finally to Katie, how we reach those other committees and how we reach full council when we're talking about issues to do with rights and young people.
I'm happy to come in here, Councillor Rogerson. I think that we have to acknowledge and recognise that everybody comes from different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, life experience, and that may indicate particular kind of views going back to the social models of people and their experiences. But I think if we can look at actually what are we trying to achieve for young people and for Cornwall, and actually if we consider we want children who are happy, healthy, safe, well developed, and therefore thrive as adults, and that impacts on community, on economy, on health, everything. What we're really talking about is the same thing, I think. So maybe it's looking at the focus of how we bring it together to achieve actually what we would like for children and young people.
Yeah, and of course what they can do for us.
Absolutely.
Lisa, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, there's two things I think here, and how we can kind of influence the wider council and the wider system. And if I refer you back to page 58 of the pack, one of the recommendations of this is that we ask the Cabinet Member for Children, Wellbeing and Public Health to endorse and promote the implementation of children's rights across the whole council. And then, as well as there's going back to One Vision, and there's our role in informing One Vision. And as you'll all be aware, that One Vision forms part of the 4 boards that make up the integrated care system across Cornwall. So it's our role and our challenge to influence those 4 other boards to make sure that even the wider system, when they're planning end of life care for adults, they're thinking about the rights of children in that work, because as we know, children will be affected by anything we do, because most children have parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, so it's really important we take that whole family approach.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lisa. And finally, Katie.
Thank you, Councillor Rogerson. And I suppose a couple of observations, and echoing all the thanks and just the amounts of positivity really coming back to you on that presentation and on everything else we've heard today. I guess a personal reflection, which is that thank you, because my son, who is quite enamoured of having a view, now has a way of expressing that view and feels very connected. He has made use of the opportunity to respond in terms of the Kerno he wants, but also getting involved in some of the other work around carbon neutral and kind of really putting himself into that space. So he feels empowered, equipped and enabled to have a voice, and I think that's really significant. Echoing the work that's happening from the diocese perspective, children and young people at the heart of what we do, I think there is certainly a momentum around hearing that voice, but really meaningfully hearing it, so that it's not kind of like a tokenistic, it's very much hearing it and appreciating it and valuing it as a part of our decision making, as you said, Lisa, across everything. I think that's really important. And also just a reminder that where we engage young people at the earliest stage in these things, we're actually growing the councillors of the future and the MPs of the future, and it's such a brilliant investment to have that group of young people coming through, knowing that they will be the social activists and they will be the kind of the methods of change and improvement and ongoing in a sustainable way. So it is exciting and it is worth it. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. That's a very positive note to end on. Before we go back to the recommendation, Mike would like to make an amendment. Over to you, Mike.
Yes, it's very tiny. It's really to add budget allocation to the collection of possibilities for number 3 for the cabinet member. So it would read assessment to inform policy development, budget allocation, service planning and commissioning.
Could I have a seconder for that, please?
Happy to second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Simon, yeah?
Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Do we need to have a roll call, or could we have a show of hands for this, Debbie, to take this amendment?
No, we can, if the Councillor Rand actually moved the recommendation as printed, but if he's happy to include Councillor Thomas's addition, that's absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you. Are you happy with that, Julian? Yes, he says yes, that's lovely. Okay, so the recommendation now reads: 1, that the committee endorses the information within the report. 2, that the committee supports the adoption of a children's rights-based approach to enable the upholding of children's rights consistently across policy, strategy, services and cultural development. And 3, that the Cabinet Member for Children, Wellbeing and Public Health be asked to endorse and promote the implementation of the Children's Rights Impact Assessment to inform policy development. And you said budgetary considerations, Mike. What was your actual wording?
Budget allocation.
Budget allocation, thank you. Service planning.
Should it be plural?
And, sorry?
Should it be plural? Allocations or just allocation? Happy with either?
Yes, okay. Let's say allocations then, because it may well come from different sources. So yes, let's go for broke. Allocations, plural, service planning and commissioning. And I'll get Debbie to do the roll call, please, the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendation as read by the Chairman and amended has been moved by Councillor Rand and seconded by Councillor Thomas. And if we could take a roll call for members, please. Again, it's for, against or abstain. Starting with Councillor Atherfold.
For.
Councillor Burden, are you on the call?
He's not on the call, Debbie.
Thank you, Tracy. Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Formosa.
For.
Councillor Frank.
For.
Councillor Gammon.
For.
Councillor Harvey. Councillor Harvey. We'll come back to Councillor Harvey. Councillor Kirk.
For.
Councillor Lennox Boyd.
For.
Councillor Massey.
For.
Councillor Mustoe.
For.
Councillor Rand.
For.
Councillor Rogerson.
For.
Councillor Sornby.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
And our 2 co-opted members, Will Elliott.
For.
Katie Fitzgibbons.
For.
Can we go back to Councillor Harvey?
Councillor Harvey, your microphone's muted.
Councillor Harvey.
Councillor Harvey, are you there?
Thank you, Chairman. I think if we have enough to go with the recommendation. So of those that were able to vote, the recommendation has been agreed unanimously.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you again for such an uplifting presentation from all of you. We know it, but it's really good to have our minds focused and issues such as it's not just listening, it's actioning and responding. So thank you very, very much indeed, all of you. Thank you. So now I'm going to move. You're very welcome. Thank you. Visit us again. And yeah, wouldn't it be lovely if we could have the young people again? And thank you for the film, because we love it when young people come and talk to us, but it's obviously more difficult under these circumstances now. But thank you. So item 8 on the agenda is the update from the Cabinet member, which you should have received this morning. And I've got a note on my agenda here, and it says see other screen from the 26th of the 11th 20, but I can't find what I sent to my other screen. But it was actually to congratulate Sally on her citation from, and I can't remember what the actual organisation was, on her work that she's done during the pandemic. So Sally, congratulations, and perhaps you'd remind us of where your lovely and very positive citation came from. Congratulations.
Thank you, Pat. And of course, as soon as I tried to fiddle to find the right screen to put myself on, it then all disappeared. Right, and I've several times moved between different gadgets. So yes, thank you for your thanks, and for all of today. Really, I think that it's a lovely bit in the maelstrom of everything else that's going on to attend and hear all those positive things that you've heard today. I think that's really cheered me right up. That has. So first of all, huge apologies for the lateness of my report. There is quite a lot going on at the moment.
I can't think what you've been doing, Sally.
Twiddling my thumbs, that's right. I have been scribbling whilst you've been all talking about different things. Bits and pieces that perhaps might be useful to add, which didn't make it into the report, but are relevant, and sometimes some of it's been things that have come up whilst we've been talking. In terms of that children's rights piece, it's hugely important, and I know we've talked before about you heard today about the Leeds child-friendly status, etc. Those are conversations I did take into Cabinet, and there was absolutely the aspiration to sort of move more quickly on some of those, and that is one of those things that feels like COVID kind of got in the way of some things that we were trying to talk about and do. So hopefully we'll be able to get to a place where we can pick up some of those things. I think it's quite right that you talk about being able to leave for the next administration some important legacy issues that we feel that they need to move forward with. Obviously, a lot of time at the moment is taken up around budget, and I noted the challenge that was referred to a few times today about the DAT budget, the drugs and alcohol team budget. Cabinet are very well aware of that and have spent some time already looking at the resolution around that. We're conscious that there's more funding needed in that area, but at the same time, you won't be surprised to hear that I would be saying that's not something that's that's easy for public health to achieve, or indeed Together for Families. So that's work in progress on that one. Reminder that on Friday there's the safeguarding all-member briefing, which covers children and adults. In terms of, I know some people have asked around things that are on my mind in terms of what things get taken to MPs meetings. I'm thinking it's useful to note that one of the things we said was our concern about losing the Troubled Families grant, and that one obviously now we know is okay for a further year. And the other one that we raised with MPs was around the backfill for schools, which didn't exist, where teachers were either clinically extremely vulnerable, therefore couldn't be in school, or were self-isolating, because we were seeing that having quite an impact on schools around the costs associated with putting staff in when those teachers were off. That one has this week. We've had news from government that that's something that they've put in place in terms of additional COVID funding for schools, so that's a good thing. Got a meeting with CAF school representatives coming up, because I think that it's important that we collectively talk about and think what our ask is around the exam situation. From a personal point of view, it doesn't feel all that comfortable to move the exams on by 3 weeks, I think it is, isn't it, at the moment, and to look at the impact on education loss for the whole period of time we've had so far for those who are going into their GCSE years now. And I guess the other bit that I'd want to say is around understanding that that's something about your expectations and your support for staff at this time who are still very much in response mode. I think it's very clear to me that everybody's working extremely hard, and it's super important to me that there's people like this committee out there who understand that, who acknowledge that, and who are part of helping to make sure that their staff feel supported whilst they're working in, different circumstances, but there are also circumstances that some people find particularly challenging. We've talked quite a bit, I think, in numerous places in the council about how we don't have that touching base in the corridor, how are you doing type of moments and options, and I think that those things and the impact of not having those things can play a part. But I think it's very clear to me that this is not a time for us to be adding. You referred to extra reports that come into the committee. We need to be very careful about managing our expectations, I think, because people are working so blooming hard. I'm assuming that you've had a chance to have a glance at report, referred there to some things around the situation with schools and COVID, because that seems to be something around which there's a lot of interesting conversations. Certainly the questions last night on the Facebook Live thing, there was quite a few things in there where people were asking questions about schools, and it's obviously considerable concern. In part, what seems to be happening is a sort of two sets of rumours. Will schools finish before the end of term, and will they start later in January? And I'm not sure exactly the provenance of rumours like this, but we are well aware that the Department for Education has taken a dim view of schools elsewhere who've suggested doing that, and that we're not promoting that, because although it feels like there's lots of COVID situations in schools, actually when you look at the percentage of children affected, it's very, very small, and we do see all of those values of being in school, which you guys are completely familiar with, which goes beyond the actual learning bit. Yeah, and I think picking up on the huge interest in all things child poverty, which absolutely has to be a good thing, has to be a really good thing, that's a conversation that it isn't just a few of us having, that lots and lots of people really want to be part of, that is really positive and useful. It fits in with our aspirations around being able to extend our holiday and hunger offer over the Christmas period, and obviously look to the future holidays in terms of what we're developing for those next few years. So I shall stop waffling, because I'm sure you'll have questions to ask.
Thank you. You haven't been waffling, that's fine. So any questions for Sally, please? No, remarkably quiet. I can't see any X's. Oh, right. Mike.
Big thank you, Sally, for what you've been doing. I'm sure it's just taken up every second of your sleeping, waking day completely, and I'm sure you do wake up in the morning thinking about it. You mentioned about how we can help with the £15 voucher, or members can help. What sort of have you in mind? Just simply going onto media streams and Facebook, or is there any other practical way that we can be of assistance?
So in particular, I'm very excited about the data around our Healthy Start vouchers at the moment. What we know is that whenever we have a push and we mention them again, we have an uptick. We had one evening, and it is nuts that we're all doing things quite late in the night, but we had one evening with the public health officer who deals with things to do with the Healthy Start voucher, pulling up all sorts of data, and we were looking at postcodes and things like that, so we could see that. So perhaps at different points last year we were on 70% uptake. Across Cornwall now an average would be 51% uptake, but we can see that there are particular parts of Cornwall where that's worse than that. 51 isn't good enough, but for it to go even lower, that would definitely be an indication that there are some parts of Cornwall. Newquay springs to mind. I know Newquay was one of them, where it was something like 44%. So what we're talking about here is vouchers for fruit and veg, and all those bits and pieces that come with the Healthy Start vouchers. And also there's access there to vitamins. There are people who email me saying we're not talking about vitamins enough. So I will do some more talking about vitamins. Vitamin D is definitely recommended for all of us during COVID times, and it's something that's available in that package for those low-income families. But we don't have. We've had probably 1,000 extra people coming onto our books as being eligible, but they're not taking up that offer. So I would really like to break the postcard data down to match it to divisions and say to people, you know, we could get competitive about this. How can you increase the percentage in your area of people who are accessing Healthy Start vouchers? Now there's some things about it that are, you know, frustrating. We've seen quite a lot of processes go over to be online, and Healthy Start vouchers don't operate like that. So there's an actual physical form that you need to hand in, that you need to have. So we need to look at where can we put those in communities. It makes sense if people could pick up their forms to fill in at the same place where they already administer Healthy Start vouchers. So there's a place where, and I can send that through Debbie, there's a place where you can put in your postcode and it will pull up for you, and that'd be useful if councillors did that. It will pull up for you all the places where Healthy Start vouchers are accepted in your patch. So you will be able to see whether all of the fruit and veg outlets that you'd expect to be on that list are on there. If there's places you think, well, I know loads of people go to this place, but it doesn't appear to be on the list as receiving Healthy Start vouchers, I think that's a conversation a councillor could have. They could go and say, have you thought about joining this? It's quite simple, this is what you do, etc. So we could potentially look at increasing the places that accept Healthy Start vouchers, and we could certainly look at making sure that through all the routes that we've got around the community newsletters, our social media, speaking to our towns and parishes, that we are talking up this offer and reminding people that it's actually some of the processes become simpler, and how to access the forms and how to apply so that people can access something that they're entitled to, that I think would really help. When we you know, all that attention that we had on the free school meals element is one part of it, but this is something where those under 4-year-olds can, we've spent a lot of time talking today about the importance of the early years, those under 4-year-olds can be accessing free food. Why wouldn't we get behind that? So that's my ask, if we can collectively see if we can increase the percentage, because again it's something we can chart and demonstrate we've made impact on. Can we increase the percentage of people who are taking up Healthy Start vouchers, reduce the gap between those who are eligible and those who take it up?
Perhaps what you've just said could be extracted as a video clip and put out as a media announcement, and that would then save having to do a lot more. But what you've said there really does help. Can I just ask one follow-up question? How long do the vouchers last for? Are they time bound? For example, if they did choose not to cash them in immediately, have they got a shelf life?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. We'll have to check that out.
I ask it because I am conscious that some food banks and I'm using this in a very generalist sense, are conscious that the uptake is not as high as has been in the past.
Lisa wants to come in on that, Mike. She might know.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know the answer, but if Anne Hall is still on the call, Anne will probably know. Are you still there, Anne?
Hi, hello, I'm still on. Hi, I'm just actually looking that up now because I've just put on the telephone line, so I'll just find out for you. Sorry.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thanks, Anne. That's terrific. Thank you.
Because if we could say to people, you may not feel you need it now, but the future is not necessarily going to be as generous as we'd like it to be.
Yeah.
So the vitamins part of it, it's only 2% take up of people who are eligible to have vitamins through that scheme. That's we've got to make a difference there.
Indeed, thank you.
Thanks, Mike, for that and drawing that to our attention and focus. Any other questions? We're literally on 1:30 where we should be finishing, but is there anybody else desperate to speak?
Yes, can I just ask one question? On food banks, I'm deeply concerned that these ad hoc food banks are setting up now, and they're lacking competition with the established food banks. And I just wonder how we can coordinate it all, because in Launceston, you've got the Salvation Army Food Bank on a Saturday morning, you've got the Council of Churches Food Bank now, and you've got the food bank that we've always had, and of course that's confusing the givers as well as the takers. But it's becoming, people have been very emotive and trying to help, but it's not coordinated anymore, and I just think it's chaotic now. And the other thing, of course, we must always remember is that in the WI magazine yesterday it said 2 million turkeys are thrown away at Christmas because people didn't get around to eating them. 1 minute we haven't got any food for people, and the next minute we throw hundreds and hundreds of tons away. I think it's half the beef in Tesco's is never sold. It's a nonsense what's going on, and I think it's got to be looked at in the bigger picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. I think maybe we'll choose to call them givers and receivers rather than givers and takers, perhaps.
What I would challenge with all of that is the idea that there's chaos, because actually what we've got now, which we didn't have before and is a kind of positive outcome of pandemic, is the Cornwall Food Alliance, and it is a collection, it's a means by which we pull together those from food banks, those who work in food insecurity in various community groups across Cornwall. So we've had a conversation with those groups collectively around what their challenges are, what things would help them, and I know that that's having a knock-on effect in terms of those conversations happening locally. So in Liscard we now have weekly meetings that involve the schools and also those working in food insecurity to talk about making sure there's a joined up approach. I know Hilary will tell you the same happens in Saltash. So I think we've got that sort of global Cornwall-wide conversation across food insecurity. We've got it happening on local levels as well. I think we probably need to do lots of thinking about when towns are proactive about that sort of thing, how that works for those who are in the hinterland of towns, who are in more rural areas, because I think it becomes a big challenge then. But I think, the conversation around food, the conversation around the things that we need to do with food is really, really developing, and it's a side effect of things that we've ended up, the territory we've needed to be in over the pandemic, but it's a good one if we have those conversations and we look at how we build the systems that will help us do better. So obviously we've got the community grants at the moment that allow for community groups to make applications. So they told us it wasn't always about access to food, it was about needing the infrastructure, the fridges and the freezers and some stuff around delivery that was issued. So there's that strand of activity to try and support the food insecurity networks that we have across Cornwall. I couldn't agree with you more about food waste, and I think that's why it's important to me that those those strands, the COVID winter grant scheme from government, that those strands are actually under public health now, because I think there's a lot of expertise there in terms of making sure the conversation about food always comes back to not just access to food, but access to nutritious food and how to develop better understanding of nutrition. And I also think there's a really strong strand around avoiding waste. So a lot of the good stuff that's happening in that food insecurity world is about using supermarket waste and avoiding it just being stuff that's thrown out. Feed bellies, not bins, is what the group locally to me would often say. So I agree with you. Food being thrown out is criminal, Neil, but I think that we have the means by which we can start to reduce that food waste and see it to the right places.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Neil, for that. Very quickly, I've got, we're way over time, but I've got Hilary. Over to you, Hilary.
Yeah, don't worry what Sally said, because exactly that. So we've set up a Saltash Food Alliance, recognising exactly the issues of food waste, food poverty, trying to assess trying to make sure that nobody's falling through the gap and making sure that the food that is collected does go to the people who really need it, and trying to eliminate food waste. But also we've realised that there is an issue with people, say an elderly couple where the wife had to go into hospital and the husband just didn't know how to cook. And so there's also that kind of element. We have a youth club locally who is they're growing vegetables that they want to try and cook and make a recipe book so that we can disseminate that around in the local community and encourage people to cook food together and eat together. So but that's obviously after the pandemic, but yes, so everything that Sally said, yes.
Thanks, Hilary, that's really positive, thank you. And that'll be young people again at the youth club organising that. Lovely way to finish this very youth orientated meeting today. Thank you. Thank you, Sally, for that and for your report. The last is any other business, and I don't want to keep you. I just have two very quick things. One was Mike sent an email asking about the ability of councillors to research within schools. And again, I'm hesitant about this because of workload for officers. In order to set up some sort of scheme like that, I think it would be difficult. But do you just want to because I think the email came to possibly me and Sally. Can you just say very briefly, because of the timescale, Mike, what you were hoping to achieve, what you were offering or suggesting in that email, please?
I'm sorry, can you remind me what it was about?
Yes, you were talking. I think it came out of the council meeting, full council, and looking at food poverty in general, looking at take up of and how we're going to do it. And you said you would be keen to work with your local schools.
Yes. Can I please assure everyone that there is no way that I would create work for anyone?
No, exactly.
Certainly, that is the last thing on my mind of all people, that I would certainly not do that. And it was certainly just an informal way of just having a conversation with the head teacher and writing a 3 or 4 liner to Sally or to an appropriate officer who wouldn't mind having 3-liner. That's all, just to really find out what's going on and just see what the issues are, because sometimes head teachers are bottling up lots of issues and they don't know how necessarily, or they don't have staff who they can send out the stuff to.
So if it's okay,
they no longer involve the local authority so closely. That's all. Just very informal. That's all. Very.
No, I'm with you, Mike.
Thanks,
I think
Mike.
What I'd say is that I've got that meeting coming up with heads representatives about other issues, but perhaps if I took into there something about whether they would find that whether they'd appreciate that involvement, how they would like that to be shaped, that might be the best starting point. Does that sound okay?
I would just simply say, would they like to share their experience with their local member? You know, don't not any more than that, because I think, you know, for local members to be familiar with what the issues are is as important, because some local members may not have the experience that you, myself and Simon and other members of this committee have from our previous lives.
Thank you so much for that, Mike. I know that you're very pro collaboration, so thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely.
But I'm not creating work. goodness,
No, I wasn't.
No work.
I wasn't saying that. I didn't feel that I could answer it as the chair as to what would be the most appropriate way of going about that. Yeah, so, but please don't think that was any criticism. It's not. You are a confirmed collaborator, and that's splendid.
I like that. I like that label. Collaborate.
Indeed so. Thank you. And the only other thing I wanted to mention was, and it escapes me, Debbie has now sent out the date for the budget meeting before Christmas, but the actual date escapes me, but just for you to note that, please. And there's
the afternoon of the 14th of December.
Lovely. Thank you, Debbie. And there's a note you can see in the chat box from Anne, who's been researching the bit about vouchers. So thank you for that, Anne. And thank you to everybody who's presented and joined in today. It's been a very positive meeting, which is now, I will formally close the meeting then at 13:40, and therefore will extend the break to, what time were we meant to be coming back? 10 minutes after, whatever it was. I'm looking at my timings, to 13:45, so we'll make it 13:55 now, please. So, and then when we'll come back to see how everything we've learned this morning fits into the scheme, the overarching scheme and strategy of One Vision, which you will be aware of from past experience on this committee, but has been revamped, and we'll hear all about it this afternoon. So thank you. Back at 13:55. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.